For as long as human memory has reached back, stories have spoken of beings who did not belong entirely to this earth. They came from the heavens, radiant and mighty, shaping the flow of rivers, the rise of great cities, and even the sacred destinies of kings. To some they were gods, to others they were revered as teachers or divine architects. Yet in every tradition, their very presence marked a line where stories meet with fact. What if these figures were not the simple inventions of imagination, but reflections of something real? Fragments of a forgotten past carried forward in the sacred symbols carved into stone and whispered in hushed rituals beneath the stars. Across the sun-scorched deserts of Mesopotamia, the grand temples of Egypt, the serene mountains of India, and the deep jungles of the Americas, the same pattern appears again and again. A miraculous arrival, a gift of immense knowledge, a sudden departure, and a quiet, unnerving promise of their return. We find ourselves walking among ruins that may not only be monuments to faith, but silent witnesses of contact with a far greater intelligence. If these myths are not myths at all, then our past is a stranger tale than we have ever been told. So what if ancient gods once ruled the earth? Tonight we open the door to that very possibility and follow the trail they left behind in legend, stone, and sky. If these stories stir something within you, these tales that live in the space between what we see and what was made to disappear, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our little map of mystery lovers light up across the globe. The story we've always been told, the one that has been passed down through generations, is that our civilization began with us. It's a clean, simple story of progress. We were once hunter-gatherers, living a nomadic life. And then, after many thousands of years, we finally settled down. But what if it's not the whole truth? What if it's just a fragment of a much larger and more awe-inspiring narrative? Long ago, before the world's borders hardened and history took form, whispers slept beneath Mesopotamian dust. They spoke of a humanity not born from chance but from design, a necessity forged by gods. In the fertile heart of Sumer, where cities shone like embers along the Tigris and Euphrates, scribes carved cuneiform into soft clay, recording the first chronicles of divine footsteps upon the earth. They called them the Anunnaki, a name heavy with reverence, laced with fear, celestial sovereigns whose decisions shaped the fate of every mortal below. These stories, whispered through the ages, do not end with the arrival of the Anunnaki. They begin with it, and what follows is a tale of labour, hierarchy, and a rebellion that changed the course of our world. According to these texts, the Anunnaki were not solitary in their dominion. Beneath them laboured another class of divine beings, a lower order of gods known as the Igigi. Their task was to carry the immense weight of the work. They were the ones who toiled in the mines, who dug the great canals that brought life to the fields, and who maintained the intricate machinery of divine order. At first, this cosmic hierarchy seemed eternal, a perfect reflection of a cosmic law. The great gods ruled, and the lesser gods laboured. It was the way of things. But myths, those fleeting memories of an ancient reality, tell us of a moment when this sacred order was broken. A moment when the Igigi could no longer bear the unbearable toil. Their voices, once silent in their labour, rose in protest against their wearying fate. They dropped their tools, they abandoned their posts, and in a defiant act, they burned the very instruments of their work. They simply demanded relief. This crisis sent a ripple through the heavens, and the great gods, the Anunnaki who ruled over them, were forced to gather in council to decide a fate for the rebellious Igigi. There, in the halls of their divine council, the great gods debated. Enlil, the stern lord of wind and command, demanded that the rebellious Igigi be punished. His was a call for swift justice and order, for a return to the cosmic law they had always known. But it was Enki, the wise god of water and all knowledge, who offered a different path, a path that would change our story forever. He reasoned that if the lesser gods refused their labour, a new being would simply be made to bear it. And so the decision was made. A new being would be created, a creature of service, designed to carry the burdens of the gods themselves. And so begins the part of the story that touches us most directly, a tale that is both strange and haunting in its detail. Instead of returning the Igigi to chains, they would fashion a new race, one built from the very elements of the world and infused with a spark of the divine. The details are unsettling in their specificity. A god was chosen for sacrifice. His blood was drained as a sacred essence. Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, then mixed that blood with the clay of the earth. From this strange and powerful fusion, the first prototype of humanity emerged. We were not born of chance. We were not born of divine affection. We were created, a living tool in the machinery of heaven. The clay tablets speak with a chilling clarity. Humans were designed to serve, to carry the burden of labour, to ensure that the wheels of the cosmos continued to turn. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine our origin not as children of the divine, but as a tool in a great machine. When read with a modern eye, the story feels uncannily like a memory of biological manipulation, as if the ancients were describing in metaphor something they only half understood. The mingling of genes, the creation of a hybrid life form. Another version of the story, preserved in the Enuma Elish, echoes the same theme, but with new imagery. After the god Marduk defeated the chaos dragon Tiamat and split her body to form the world, he faced the same dilemma. Who would tend to this new creation? He decreed that humans would be formed from the blood of King, the vanquished consort of Tiamat, mixed again with the earth. Once more, humanity's beginning is written not as a blessing, but as the recycling of divine flesh into a workforce. The texts do not romanticize this process. They speak of sacrifice, of utility, of a creation born from necessity. And yet, in the bluntness of these ancient tales lies something truly extraordinary. The idea that mankind carries within itself both the dust of the ground and the spark of something beyond. The choice of materials is telling. Clay, the substance of earth itself, pliable and humble, becomes the body. Blood, a vital and mysterious liquid, becomes the spirit. To the ancients, blood was life itself. It was the force that carried breath and heat, the sacred fluid that linked mortals to the gods. By mingling the two, the myth says the gods created beings, both bound to the soil and touched by heaven. It is a vision that resonates even today. The image of gods bending over a damp clay mound is almost tender, a beautiful and poignant scene. But the purpose behind it is pragmatic. Humanity was made to fill a gap left by a divine rebellion. Within these tales lies another tension, one that echoes across civilizations, the rivalry between Enlil, who sought to punish the gods, and Enki, who chose to create us instead. Enlil, often stern and unyielding, sought order above all. He wanted a world where humans remained obedient and limited. Enki, on the other hand, is remembered as a protector, a giver of forbidden knowledge who defied his peers to grant humanity the tools of survival. It was Enki who warned the sage Atrahasis of the coming flood, a story that would later be retold in the traditions of Noah. It was Enki who, much like the serpent of Eden, urged humanity toward wisdom, even at the cost of divine punishment. In this contest between divine authority and human curiosity, we can glimpse the very struggle that defines our history, the desire for knowledge against the fear of losing control. The clay tablets do not offer us tidy answers, only fragments. Yet in those fragments, we recognize questions that still haunt us. The Anunnaki were not described as distant, ethereal spirits. The texts tell us that they were beings with a presence, with form, and with a hierarchy. Anu, the Sky Father, presided from above, while Kai, the Earth Mother, rooted creation below. Their children, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, and Ninhursag, intervened directly in the affairs of the world. They were said to establish kingship, to teach crafts, and to wage wars. And yet these gods did not remain forever. The texts suggest that after the ages of mingling with humankind, they withdrew, leaving mortals to govern themselves. Some traditions suggest that kingship descended from heaven, as though authority itself was a gift transferred from a departing power. If taken literally, it hints at a moment when the guardians of civilization stepped aside, perhaps retreating into hidden realms or leaving this world altogether. But myth has a way of clinging to memory. For we still speak of ourselves as creatures of the earth, yet we are haunted by a deep and restless feeling that we are somehow more than dust, a feeling that we are touched by something greater, a restlessness that suggests we were designed for a purpose beyond the mundane. What is truly remarkable is how this same motif echoes across cultures and continents, like a song sung in a different language, but with the same melody. In the Hebrew Genesis, the story tells us that Adam was shaped from the clay of the ground, from Adma, and animated by the breath of God. In Greek legend, the Titan Prometheus molds the first humans from earth and water, only to see them animated by the sacred fire he stole from the gods. In the sacred texts of the Maya, the Popol Vuh, the creator gods try first with mud which collapses, then with wood which lacks soul, before finally succeeding with maize. Everywhere you look, the same story repeats itself again and again. A simple, humble substance from the earth is mixed with something vital, something from the heavens, and from that strange fusion, humanity comes into being. Was this a universal metaphor for our connection to the soil, or does it echo a shared, deeper memory, a memory so profound it imprinted itself on the very DNA of our civilizations? For the Mesopotamians, the question was not whether man was free, but whether man could even endure. The first humans were described as fragile, their lifespans short, their bodies weak. Some versions of the Atrahasis epic even say that the early prototypes failed. They were simply unable to survive the immense demands placed upon them by their creators. The texts tell us that Enki, the god of wisdom, had to refine the process, adjusting and correcting, toiling over his creation until a form appeared that could both serve and multiply. To read these ancient lines is to get a sense of divine experimentation, as though the ancients imagined creation as a series of trials and errors rather than a simple miraculous event. The gods were not infallible. They tinkered, they tested, they struggled, until they achieved the result they desired. And there is a profound sense of unease in these myths, a feeling that humanity's birth was tainted with a form of exploitation. We were made not to rule, but to labour. We were made to carry the burdens of the gods. Yet within that subjugation, that feeling of being a mere tool, lies the very seed of our defiance. The clay tablets tell us that Enki, the wise god who sympathised with his creations, often undermined the harsher decrees of the stern Enlil. He whispered forbidden knowledge, teaching humans crafts and wisdom that allowed them to grow beyond mere servitude. This tension between being the tools of the gods and becoming masters of ourselves would come to shape the very destiny of our civilizations. Consider how this plays out even in their rituals. In Mesopotamian temples, priests offered food and incense not as worship, but as sustenance for the gods. Humanity's role was to maintain the cosmic household, to feed and serve and honour their creators. Yet in time, kings emerged who claimed a divine sanction to rule, not as mere slaves, but as stewards of a sacred order. The very beings created to carry burdens had begun to carve empires, to write laws and to build monuments that rivaled the heavens. Perhaps this is the great irony of the myth, that creatures born to serve would one day stand in judgment of their makers, turning a story of subjugation into one of slow, defiant ascent. When we look at these myths with modern eyes, we cannot help but hear the echo of a scientific language. We hear the word clay, and we think of it as genetic material. We hear the word blood, and we think of it as DNA. We hear sacrifice, and we think of the transfer of vital information. The ancients may not have known the terms, but they preserved the imagery. Was this their attempt to describe something they witnessed? Something that felt less like a ritual and more like a procedure? Did they sense that their own existence was the product of design, not of accident? These are questions that we cannot answer, or with any certainty. Yet the persistence of the motif across cultures suggests that it touched something fundamental in the human psyche. At night, when the great cities of Ur and Uruk were still alive, torches flickered in the temples, and hymns rose to the Anunnaki. Farmers in the fields looked up at the stars, believing that their toil was part of a covenant older than memory. They were the children of clay and blood, caught between the earth beneath their feet and the sky above their heads. Whether the gods who shaped them were real beings, symbolic forces, or simply projections of our own fear and wonder, the effect was the same. Humanity saw itself as bound to powers greater than itself. That belief would not only define Mesopotamia, but ripple outward, carried along trade routes and through migrations, shaping the stories of distant lands. And so the image lingers, hands of gods pressing into soft clay, the crimson stain of sacrifice mixing into mud, and from it rising the fragile, restless figure of a human being. A creature designed for labour, yet destined for something more. A tool, yet a dreamer. Dust of the ground, yet filled with the blood of the divine. That profound paradox, written thousands of years ago, still haunts us today. There is a peculiar moment in the ancient records when the vast distance between heaven and earth seems to collapse. When the gods are no longer just distant names, but physical rulers whose reigns are etched into the memory of kingship itself. In Mesopotamia, this is perfectly preserved in the Sumerian king list, a text that looks at first like a dry catalogue of rulers, yet upon closer reading becomes one of the strangest and most compelling documents ever written. It describes a time when kingship descended from heaven, when divine rulers walked among mortals, guiding cities, setting laws, and establishing civilization. The list begins not with human names, but with figures whose reigns lasted for thousands of years, lengths so vast that they defy all belief. For example, it is said that 10 kings ruled before the Great Flood, their combined reigns stretching for tens of thousands of years. And then suddenly, after the flood, the story changes. Lifespans shrink, kingship passes to mortals, and history, as we know it, begins. To the modern reader, these numbers sound impossible. They sound like the kind of exaggeration that belongs to myth rather than fact. Yet the document was not written as myth. It was written as a record, a chronicle inscribed on clay tablets by scribes who believed they were preserving a sacred truth. Why would they preserve reigns of 20,000 or 30,000 years, if not to convey something extraordinary, even if they themselves did not fully understand it? Some suggest the numbers are simply symbolic, encoding astronomical cycles or ritual patterns. Others argue that they might preserve a genuine memory of beings whose lifespans were truly beyond human measure. If the Anunnaki were real, if they were something more than just imagined gods, then perhaps their longevity, their near immortality, was remembered in the only way the scribes could describe it. Reigns that stretched into what seemed like eternity. The image is haunting. Imagine a city like Eridu, the very first city of Sumer, rising from the marshes with its temple at the centre. At its head was not a fragile mortal, but a being regarded as divine, a king who might live for centuries, perhaps longer. His very presence would have blurred the line between worship and governance, for to obey the king was to obey the gods themselves. These rulers were not merely intermediaries, they were the living embodiment of power, a living proof that heaven's authority was seated right here on earth. This idea of divine rulers would echo throughout later civilizations carried in the currents of time. In Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a king, but was seen as the living embodiment of the god Horus. In ancient China, the emperor ruled under a mandate of heaven, a sacred sanction that legitimized his power. And in the great civilizations of Mesoamerica, divine kings traced their very bloodlines to celestial beings. The concept of rulers as gods or as their direct representatives may have begun here in the Fertile Crescent, at a time when divine figures walked and ruled as kings. If the king list is to be believed, the Great Flood was a dividing line, a great pause in history. Before it, the divine kings ruled directly. After it, human rulers inherited the mantle. They were shorter-lived, weaker, and yet they still claimed their legitimacy through a sacred connection to the gods. This transition feels less like an abrupt ending and more like a quiet, deliberate withdrawal. It suggests a time when the gods simply stepped back, handing governance to mortals, but leaving behind the very framework of kingship. Even in later dynasties, kings were careful to present themselves as chosen by the gods, as descendants of divine blood, as protectors of a cosmic order. It is as though humanity, once created merely to serve, had been promoted to caretakers, carrying the memory of a golden age when the gods themselves were present on earth. But what does it mean that the earliest rulers lived for thousands of years? Some scholars, of course, will dismiss it as poetic license, an exaggeration meant to glorify long-dead ancestors, but others note that similar claims appear elsewhere in the ancient world. In the Hebrew Bible, patriarchs before the flood lived for nearly 1,000 years. In ancient Chinese chronicles, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors are said to have ruled for centuries. And in Hindu tradition, the beings of earlier ages enjoyed lifespans far longer than ours. Could it be that all these traditions are pointing to a forgotten truth? That there was once a time or a type of being whose very existence stretched far beyond the limits of our human biology? If so, then perhaps the memory of those beings was preserved in king lists and genealogies and in sacred texts that were later interpreted as myth when the reality had long vanished. Archaeology, in its own silent way, has given us a curious validation. It has uncovered cities that match the names in the king list. Ur, Uruk, Kish, Lagash. These were not imaginary places. They were thriving centres of culture and power. And in their temples, statues of the gods were carried in processions, fed with offerings and adorned with jewels. To the people who lived there, the gods were not invisible abstractions. They were present in rituals, invoked in contracts, and embedded in every single aspect of their law and their society. And if certain rulers carried themselves as gods in human form, perhaps it was because they were seen as a direct continuation of an earlier time when divine beings sat on the very thrones of the earth. The clay tablets record not just who ruled, but for how long, as if the measure of a divine presence was not in miracles, but in sheer endurance. One might ask, what happened when these beings simply vanished? Did they die? Did they retreat? Did they simply ascend? The ancient texts are silent, but the silence itself speaks volumes. There is no tale of great battles where the gods were slain, no stories of a final tearful departure. Instead, there is a gap, a sudden, unexplained shift from reigns of thousands of years to reigns of mere decades. It is as if the gods simply stepped aside, leaving mortals to carry on in their absence. Some interpretations suggest they withdrew into hidden realms, or perhaps returned to the stars from which they came. Others believe they remain among us, unseen, their influence subtle but enduring. For the people of Mesopotamia, the memory was enough. They continued to honour the Anunnaki in hymns and rituals, invoking their names long after their physical presence had faded. The idea of gods walking the earth is not unique to Mesopotamia. In Greek tradition, Zeus, Apollo, and Athena mingled with mortals, sometimes disguising themselves, sometimes ruling openly. In Egyptian belief, the first pharaohs were gods themselves, reigning before the age of men. In Mesoamerican lore, Quetzalcoatl and other deities arrived as teachers and rulers. Across cultures, the same motif repeats. A time when the gods were not distant, but immediate. When the line between mortal and divine was blurred. Perhaps this is why so many myths look backward to a golden age. They are not longing for a utopia of imagination, but for a remembered epoch when beings greater than ourselves shaped the world directly. Standing among the ruins of Uruk today, one can almost imagine the city in its prime. Walls stretching for miles, temples rising high, and within them, rulers who were regarded not as men, but as living gods. The air thick with the scent of incense, the chants of priests echoing against mud brick walls, the ziggurat shimmering under the sun. To the people who lived there, this was not fantasy. It was the order of the cosmos made visible. And when the king list tells us that these rulers lived for thousands of years, perhaps it is not exaggeration, but a direct testimony to a reality we can scarcely comprehend. So we are left with a tantalizing question. Were these long-lived rulers flesh and blood, or symbols of divine cycles? Were they human kings elevated into legend, or beings of another kind whose reigns were measured in centuries? The tablets do not offer a clear answer. They only preserve the memory that before the Great Flood, before history as we know it, the world was ruled by those who were not entirely human. And that memory, carved into clay and buried for millennia, still whispers to us across time, a final lingering thought. Once the gods themselves were here, far to the west of Mesopotamia, along the slow eternal ribbon of the Nile, another civilization rose, vast and luminous, building monuments that still command our awe and wonder thousands of years later. This land of pyramids and endless desert horizons preserved in its sacred texts the memory of a primordial era. They called it Zep Tepi, which means the first time. According to inscriptions carved into temple walls and whispered in the sacred pyramid texts, this was no ordinary beginning. It was the dawn of our world, a time when the gods themselves walked the earth, shaping the land, setting the very first laws, and ruling for ages before the line of mortal pharaohs ever began. For the Egyptians, Zep Tepi wasn't just a myth in the sense of pure imagination. It was sacred history, the bedrock upon which their entire conception of kingship and cosmic order was founded. In this first time, the world was said to be a chaotic expanse of endless waters until the great sun god, Atum-Ra, rose from the abyss, bringing light, bringing the first piece of land, and bringing order to a world of chaos. From him emerged a lineage of divine rulers. First, Shu, the god of air, and his consort Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Then came Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the goddess of the sky, and onward through the beloved gods, Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Horus. These were not remote, abstract concepts, but living presences, deities who reigned on earth before eventually retreating to the heavens. Egyptian tradition held that before the mortal dynasties began, these divine kings ruled for thousands of years, echoing the very same strange, long reigns described in the Sumerian king list. Once again, we see the pattern. An age when divine beings held a direct dominion, followed by a quiet transition into human rule. This is a story that refuses to stay in one place. What is striking, and perhaps the most mysterious part of this story, is the way Egyptian art depicted these gods. They were shown as humanoid figures, but with the heads of falcons, jackals, or ibis. Their forms were both familiar and alien at the same time. Many were shown with elongated crowns, and in some ancient depictions, their very skulls seemed stretched, hinting at proportions far beyond those of ordinary humans. Was this purely symbolic? a way of showing divine attributes? Or did it reflect something more literal? A faint memory of beings whose very appearance differed from our own. Even some pharaohs, like Akhenaten, were portrayed with unusually long heads and slender bodies. Their statues were so different from the traditional human forms that they have fueled endless speculation. Were these artistic choices a deliberate attempt to echo the gods of Zep Tepi, or did they hint at a bloodline that carried something more than human, a genetic legacy from the first time? It's a question that whispers from the cold stone of their statues, a question that lingers. For the Egyptians, kingship was never a simple political office. To wear the crown was to embody divine essence, to become Horus in life and Osiris in death. Unlike Mesopotamian rulers who governed on behalf of the gods, the pharaohs of Egypt were gods themselves. They were living incarnations of the Neteru, the divine order made manifest on earth. This belief was not metaphorical, but literal, shaping every aspect of their lives, their rituals, their laws, and the very architecture of their power. To disobey the pharaoh was to disrupt the harmony of the cosmos, for he was the ultimate mediator between earth and heaven. Such a profound conception of power could not have arisen from nowhere. It was a belief inherited directly from the memory of Zep Tepi, a time when gods had once walked along the slow eternal ribbon of the Nile and ruled directly. The pharaoh was their continuation, their descendant, their earthly vessel. The temples and pyramids stand as echoes of this belief. They are not just works of engineering, they are a profound statement of a cosmic connection. The sacred pyramid texts, inscribed in the burial chambers of the kings, speak of journeys into the sky. They speak of pharaohs ascending to join the imperishable stars, of doors opening in the heavens. These texts describe not just a spiritual ascent, but what sounds like a literal passage, the ruler carried into the realm of the gods. At times, the language feels eerily close to descriptions of travel through the sky, as if these structures were more than just tombs. Perhaps they were gateways or markers of a deep and profound connection between worlds. The Great Pyramid itself, aligned with uncanny precision to the cardinal points and to the stars of Orion, seems less like an ordinary monument and more like a device. Whether it was symbolic or functional, it was built to be a link between Earth and the vast cosmos. Consider the powerful myth of Osiris, the god who ruled Egypt before being slain and dismembered by his jealous brother, Seth. He was resurrected by his devoted wife, Isis, and went on to reign as the lord of the underworld. In the myth, his son Horus avenges him and takes the throne, establishing the line of kings that continued into our mortal history. Osiris is not presented as an untouchable figure beyond time. He is a ruler who lives, dies, and rules again, bridging the gap between the divine and the human. In the story of Isis gathering his scattered fragments and breathing life back into him, we hear not only a tale of love and loss, but perhaps a memory of knowledge lost and regained. A memory of technologies or powers that seem to defy mortality. The Egyptian vision of Zep Tepi also included great works of architecture and wisdom, which was said to have been bestowed directly by the gods themselves. Some traditions spoke of the god Thoth, the great lord of writing and knowledge, as the one who gave humanity language, mathematics, and the secrets of the heavens. Others credited him with the building of the pyramids, or with preserving records from an even earlier, now vanished civilization. In later Hellenistic times, Thoth would be equated with Hermes Trismegistus, the keeper of occult wisdom, a figure whose teachings would go on to influence alchemists, philosophers, and mystics for centuries. Once again, we encounter the recurring pattern of divine beings as the bringers of knowledge and the lingering suspicion that their wisdom was far more advanced than the era should have allowed. What makes Zep Tepi so compelling is how central it remained to the Egyptian identity. It was not a myth tucked away in obscure texts. It was carved into the very walls of their temples. It was spoken in daily rituals. It was encoded into the very structure of their kingship. When a new pharaoh ascended the throne, he was not beginning something new. He was restoring the order that had been established in the first time. Every coronation was an echo of that divine moment, a solemn reenactment of the gods' rule on earth. And when the pharaoh died, he was said to return to join the eternal gods, his soul sailing the celestial river, his body placed in monuments aligned to the stars. Standing before the massive statues of Luxor, or gazing up at the Sphinx, one cannot help but feel the immense weight of this memory. These were not simply works of stone and engineering. They were attempts to preserve a connection with the first time, to keep alive the sacred thread between humanity and the beings who had once walked among them. Whether those beings were gods, ancestors, or something we might now call extraterrestrial, the effect was the same. The Egyptians believed their civilization was founded not by men, but by those who came before. Those who possessed power and wisdom far beyond human comprehension. Modern archaeology tells us that Egypt's greatness was the product of human ingenuity, labour, and their profound adaptation to the cycles of the Nile. And yet the myths remain, insistent, refusing to vanish. They whisper of a lost era, a golden age when gods ruled as kings, when knowledge flowed freely, and when monuments were raised not merely to honour the dead, but to serve as bridges to the stars. Whether it was all symbolic or all real, Zep Tepi endures as a question mark in history. Was it only a myth, or was it the faint, fading memory of a time when the boundary between the human and the divine was not yet drawn? The pyramids of Egypt rise from the desert like a frozen echo of something immense. They are monuments so vast and so precise that even after thousands of years, they seem to stand beyond the reach of mortal hands. To the modern visitor, the Great Pyramid of Giza looms as a silent enigma. Its blocks are stacked with a geometric perfection that still baffles engineers today. Its base is aligned almost flawlessly with the cardinal directions, and its proportions seem to reflect mathematical constants that would not be formally defined for thousands of years. Official history tells us a simple story, that these were tombs, grand sepulchres for pharaohs who wished to preserve their glory into eternity. Yet to stand before them, to trace the sharp edges of stones weighing more than 2 tons apiece, to see how their placement defies error across acres of desert plateau, is to feel that these structures may have served a purpose far greater than simple ritual. The mainstream view insists on human labour. They paint a picture of tens of thousands of workers, decades of toil, simple copper tools grinding against hard limestone, and ropes and sledges dragging immense blocks across the scorching sands. Yet alternative theories have long whispered a different possibility. Could these monuments have been built with knowledge not of their time, a profound knowledge imparted from an earlier age, or from beings beyond our human origin? The question lingers because the pyramids do not, in their very nature, behave like ordinary tombs. Unlike the later royal burials, they contain no lavish inscriptions, no detailed hieroglyphs recounting the deeds of a king. The Great Pyramid, in particular, is eerily silent inside, its chambers bare, its walls smooth, as if designed not for ceremony, but for a hidden function. Some researchers have pointed to the very choice of materials as being suggestive of a different purpose. The pyramid incorporates limestone casing stones, granite in its inner chambers, and even traces of quartz, materials all known for their conductive properties. Could this combination have been deliberate, forming a structure capable of channeling or amplifying some unknown form of energy? The notion seems fantastical, something out of a science fiction story, yet experiments with models have shown strange electromagnetic effects within its passages. If this is true, then the Great Pyramid may have been less a tomb and more of a machine, an immense device that harnessed natural forces in ways that we are only just beginning to rediscover. Legends from later ages even speak of pyramids as sources of light or as repositories of secret knowledge, a vast library of wisdom hidden in stone. The incredible alignment of the pyramids adds to the mystery. The three great pyramids of Giza form a pattern that mirrors the stars of Orion's belt, as if designed to be part of a celestial map. At certain times of the year, sacred shafts within the Great Pyramid point directly toward key stars such as Sirius and Orion. To the ancient Egyptians, these were not just points of light in the sky, but gateways. They were the homes of gods and the final destinations of the souls of the departed. The pharaoh's passage into the afterlife was imagined as a cosmic journey to the imperishable stars, and the pyramid, aligned with such incredible precision, became the vessel for that very voyage. Was it purely symbolic architecture meant to guide the soul, or was it something more, a physical beacon, a kind of signal to the heavens? Consider the sheer logistics. Each block of the Great Pyramid averages 2.5 tons, some weighing over 70 tons, and more than 2 million of them were set into place, with joints so fine that a blade cannot even fit between them. How could this have been achieved with primitive tools and simple manpower alone? Mainstream archaeology answers with theories of ramps and relentless labour, but alternative thinkers argue that the difficulty is not just in moving the stones, but in the incredible challenge of aligning them, of setting them with such precision over such a vast structure. To accomplish this requires knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering that seems to belong to an era far more advanced than the 3rd millennium BC. Legends suggest that the Netjeru themselves, the divine beings of Zep Tepi, may have imparted this knowledge. Some inscriptions speak of the gods teaching architecture, of wisdom handed down from the stars. Later traditions even claim that the pyramids were built to preserve knowledge from a coming flood, a massive vault of wisdom meant to outlast the coming catastrophe. If true, then the pyramids were not merely tombs, but time capsules. They were deliberately constructed to carry the sacred memory of a lost civilization across ages of destruction. And when you stand before them today, silent and immense, you can almost hear the echoes of that ancient story. And what of the Sphinx, that silent sentinel which has crouched beside the pyramids for millennia, its body worn not just by wind and sand, but by water erosion? Some geologists argue that these marks of rainfall on its body predate the official dynasties of Egypt by thousands of years. Think of that for a moment. If the Sphinx truly bears the marks of rainfall from a wetter age, then it may have been carved in an epoch when the Sahara was a green and fertile land, long before the official rise of pharaonic civilization. If this is true, then the Sphinx and the pyramids may not be the creations of the Old Kingdom alone, but inheritances from an earlier, forgotten time. They would be echoes of a civilization that reached its height before being swallowed by the relentless desert sands. To look into the Sphinx's eroded gaze is to feel that you are not just looking at a monument, but at a living memory of a time we have long since forgotten. It is a silent witness, a guardian of a truth too ancient to be spoken. Inside the Great Pyramid, the strangeness only deepens. The so-called King's Chamber, with its single empty granite sarcophagus, shows no signs of ever having held a body. There are no inscriptions, no ceremonies, no trappings of a burial, but its acoustics are extraordinary. A low hum resonates through its stone, amplifying sound in ways that feel profoundly intentional. The passageways leading to it are narrow and precise, some angled to align with specific stars. Some researchers have suggested that the entire structure may have been designed to interact with vibration, with resonance, and even with light itself. If this is true, then the pyramid is not a tomb, but an instrument. A vast and complex instrument on a scale so immense that its true purpose escapes us. Egyptian texts refer to the pyramids as places of ascension, as stairways to the gods. In that sense, whether they were machines, tombs, or something in between, their function was always to bridge worlds. They stood as the central symbols of Egyptian civilization, the living embodiment of the idea that death was not an end, but a passage, that the soul could rise from the earth and join the stars. Perhaps the technology of their construction, whether lost or mythical, was itself a part of that message. A way to demonstrate that humanity, with or without divine aid, could build structures that defy time, monuments that would outlast entire empires. Standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, one cannot help but feel its silent gaze. Its stones do not answer questions, yet they pose them relentlessly. Were these monuments the culmination of sheer human determination and ingenuity? Or were they the legacy of something greater, the remnants of knowledge from a forgotten age when gods and men may have built together? Tomb or machine, symbol or technology, the pyramids continue to speak across the desert winds, reminding us that some mysteries are too vast to be buried. The Sphinx in its silent repose and the pyramids in their immense stillness are not just relics of the past. They are living questions, questions that whisper of a golden age, of a forgotten time, and of a boundary between the human and the divine that was once far thinner than we ever dared to admit. Now let us journey far to the east across the mountains and river plains of a land where the Ganges flows like a sacred artery. Here in ancient India, myths were not only preserved as stories but as sprawling epics, recited for centuries before ever being written down. Among them, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana stand as vast tapestries of gods, kings, and cosmic battles that defy all scale. Within their verses, we find a motif that is now familiar to us from Mesopotamia and Egypt. Beings who descend from the heavens, who divide themselves into rival factions, and who shape the very destiny of humanity. In India, they were called the Devas and the Asuras. In later Hindu tradition, the Devas would become the gods, and the Asuras would become the demons, forces of light opposed to darkness. Yet, the earliest Vedic hymns paint a far more complex picture. Both groups were powerful, luminous, and divine. Both sought dominion over heaven and earth. Their conflict was not simply a moral one, but a political one. It was a struggle between rival houses of the cosmos. The Devas, the Shining Ones, were associated with wisdom, order, and balance. They upheld Dharma, the cosmic law that sustains all life and harmony. Indra, the king of the Devas, wielded the thunderbolt against chaos. Agni, the fire, carried offerings to the gods. Surya shone as the sun. Vishnu preserved life, and Varuna upheld the order of the waters and the skies. The Asuras, in contrast, were proud and ambitious, often challenging the authority of the Devas. In some hymns, they are not demonic at all, but simply another clan of divine beings, rivals whose rebellion mirrors that of the Igigi in Mesopotamian myth. Only in later retellings did they take on the role of demons, cast down for their defiance. But even in their rebellion, they seem less like a personification of evil and more like displaced rulers, beings who once shared in the governance of heaven before being rebranded as adversaries. The battles between these factions were described not as mere allegories, but as wars fought with weapons of astonishing and terrifying power. The texts speak of astras, divine armaments summoned with sacred mantras, weapons that shone like suns that could level entire armies and incinerate cities. Among the most vivid and haunting descriptions are those of the Brahmastra, a weapon said to blaze brighter than 10,000 suns, leaving vast wastelands, poisoned and lifeless. The imagery is hauntingly modern, resembling in detail the accounts of a nuclear devastation. The texts describe survivors who lose their hair and nails, rivers that are poisoned, and lands that become barren for centuries. Could these descriptions be metaphors for natural disasters? Or are they distorted memories of warfare fought with weapons far beyond the technology of their time. Even more enigmatic are the descriptions of Vimanas, the flying vehicles of gods and kings. In the Ramayana, the hero Rama's enemy, Ravana, commands a great aerial chariot called the Pushpaka Vimana, which could travel anywhere at will. The Mahabharata describes Vimanas as multi-tiered, radiant machines able to soar to great heights, maneuver swiftly, and even cross into other realms. Later texts, like the Vaimanika Shastra, a Sanskrit manuscript rediscovered in the early 20th century, provide detailed accounts of Vimanas, their propulsion, and their very construction. It speaks of engines powered by a substance called quicksilver, of anti-gravity mechanisms, and of pilots trained in complex controls. Scholars still debate the text's origins, with many calling it a modern forgery. Yet the imagery it contains mirrors the descriptions found in much older epics, where Vimanas are not metaphors, but practical crafts of war and transport. What is most striking is the variety of Vimanas. Some are described as small and agile, darting across the battlefield. Others are vast, like flying palaces, adorned with golden domes and capable of carrying whole retinues of warriors. They can ascend to the sun, descend to the earth, and even traverse between the realms of gods and mortals. In some accounts, they release missiles, beams of light, or fiery projectiles. To the people of ancient India, these were not abstractions but literal machines of the gods. The very word Vimanada means measured out or having been traversed, hinting at a sense of engineering and precision. If we strip away the lens of mythology, what remains reads uncannily like descriptions of aerial vehicles, a technology that should not have existed in the distant past yet appears again and again in these ancient texts. In the Great War of the Mahabharata, Vimanas fill the sky as celestial chariots, carrying heroes and gods alike. Their battles echo across heaven and earth with weapons that scorch, blind, and annihilate. Arjuna, guided by the god Krishna, unleashes astras that darken the sun, while his enemies retaliate with armaments that shatter mountains. These passages, whether allegorical or not, carry a visceral quality, as though they were recounting events that were actually witnessed rather than simply imagined. Archaeological studies at sites like Mohenjo-daro have uncovered evidence of sudden and violent destruction. Skeletons lying in the streets, traces of vitrification in stone, signs of an intense heat that could have only come from an immense flash of energy. While mainstream archaeology attributes this to fires or natural disasters, some see in it the shadow of an ancient war, a devastation on a scale that recalls the fiery astras of the epic. At the heart of Hindu cosmology lies the Trimurti, Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Together, they govern the cycles of birth, life, and death. Their roles mirror natural forces, yet to some, they represent not only cosmic principles but living powers who once walked the earth. Shiva, with his third eye that unleashes destruction, has been likened to an energy weapon capable of leveling worlds. Vishnu, who descends in avatars to restore balance in times of crisis, recalls the motif of gods intervening when humanity falters, guiding civilizations back to order. Brahma, who fashions life, may symbolize creation through knowledge, perhaps even the manipulation of life itself, just as we saw in the Mesopotamian myths of clay and blood. These gods, whether symbolic or literal, embody the same archetype found across cultures, beings with power over creation, knowledge, and destruction, whose actions echo in human destiny. But beyond the warfare and the cosmic drama, there is something deeply human in these stories. The gods are not remote, untouchable forces. They love, they betray, they protect, and they punish. They take sides in human affairs, mentor chosen heroes, and curse their enemies. The boundary between divine and mortal is porous. Kings claim descent from gods. Warriors wield weapons gifted by them, and sometimes gods themselves are born into human form. The epics suggest not a world of separation, but of intimacy, a time when the divine was entangled with the human, shaping history in ways both wondrous and terrifying. Standing before the ruins of ancient India, the massive baths of Mohenjo-daro, the mysterious seals of the Indus Valley, and the great temples rising in later ages, it is tempting to dismiss the Vimanas and Astras as imagination, as poetic metaphors for storms or cosmic truths. And yet the sheer level of detail, the persistence of the stories, and the undeniable parallels with myths elsewhere leave us uneasy. Why do so many cultures speak of gods arriving from the sky in machines of fire? Why do they describe weapons of light and destruction that seem centuries out of place? And why do they so often frame human destiny as the byproduct of rivalries among these celestial beings? Perhaps the Vimanas were never machines at all, but visions of shamans, metaphors for altered states of consciousness. Or perhaps they were real, the remembered crafts of beings who visited long before recorded history, their presence woven into myth, because myth was the only language available to describe them. Whatever the truth, the stories endure, and they remain, like echoes of a battle fought in the sky, long ago, in the thunder of Indra's bolt, in the shining chariots of the epics, and in the voice of Krishna guiding Arjuna on the battlefield. There lingers the memory of a time when the sky was filled with more than just clouds. It was a time when the battles of gods and mortals lit the entire horizon, and when the destiny of mankind was written not only in soil and blood, but in the very fire of the heavens. In the long and sprawling verses of the Mahabharata, war is not described as a simple clash of swords and shields, but as a cosmic upheaval that shook the earth and scarred the sky. The Kurukshetra battlefield becomes a stage where men and gods unleash forces that sound uncannily like weapons of an age far more advanced than the one historians assign to this epic. Arrows tipped with fire consume entire divisions, projectiles streak across the heavens, blinding warriors with their brilliant light. Astras, divine weapons invoked by mantra, descend with explosions that shake the very ground. And among them, the Brahmastra stands out. It is described as a weapon so powerful that the earth shook, the oceans boiled, and the sun itself shone with the brightness of 10,000 suns. When unleashed, it scorched the battlefield, reduced cities to ash, and poisoned the land so that nothing could ever grow again. Survivors were said to have lost their hair and nails, their skin burning from within, a description that sends a profound chill down the spines of modern readers who recognize in it the chilling symptoms of radiation exposure. For centuries, these tales were dismissed as nothing more than poetic metaphor, a way of dramatizing the horrors of war. Yet the details are strangely consistent. They speak of mushrooming clouds, of winds that carried death, and of rivers that turned black and became unfit to drink. Such descriptions do not sound like a metaphor for spears or clubs. They sound like eyewitness accounts of a devastation on a scale far beyond ordinary warfare. Could the Mahabharata be preserving a memory of some lost technology, a glimpse of weapons whose power rivals those of our modern atomic age? The question deepens when we turn to the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, one of the principal cities of the Indus Valley civilization. When archaeologists first excavated its streets, they found skeletons lying as though struck down suddenly, their bodies twisted in poses of terror. The city showed no signs of gradual decline, no evidence of a long siege or famine, but instead suggested an abrupt and violent destruction. Even more puzzling were patches of stone that appeared vitrified, fused as if subjected to intense heat. In some cases, the levels of radiation measured in the area were reported to be higher than normal. Though such claims remain controversial, the imagery of a once thriving city reduced to silence by an overwhelming force echoes too strongly with the descriptions in the epic to be ignored. Mainstream archaeology explains Mohenjo-daro's fall through more mundane causes. invasion, climate change, or shifts in the river that sustained it. Yet the unsettling parallels remain. A city abandoned suddenly, its inhabitants struck down, its remains carrying whispers of a fire that melted stone. The Mahabharata speaks of cities incinerated by astras. The ruins of the Indus Valley show signs of an abrupt calamity. Between text and excavation lies a question that refuses to vanish. Were the ancients only imagining, or were they remembering? Even within the Mahabharata itself, there is a clear recognition of the danger posed by such weapons. Warriors are cautioned against using them indiscriminately, for they could annihilate friend and foe alike. Arjuna, the hero guided by Krishna, is told to restrain the Brahmastra, for its deployment could devastate the entire world. The cautionary tone is striking, echoing the modern anxieties of nuclear proliferation. It suggests that, even within the myth, there was an awareness of a power too great for mortal hands, knowledge that had to be withheld and passed only to those deemed truly worthy. The resonance with Mesopotamian myths of forbidden knowledge, or with the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, who taught men secret arts, is unmistakable. Across cultures we find the same theme, the Jihai, FT of powerful knowledge, the temptation to use it, and the devastation that inevitably follows. The great war of the Mahabharata, was not fought only with blades and bows. The ancient texts tell of a far more terrifying kind of battle, one fought with machines of the sky. They describe the Vimanas as they crisscross the battlefield, not as simple chariots, but as crafts of war that launched fiery projectiles and beams of light. The imagery suggests a form of aerial combat, an element of warfare that seems entirely out of place in a distant past. If one reads these verses with a skeptical mind, they sound like a poetic metaphor for the power of the gods. But if one entertains the possibility of memory, then perhaps these passages are a glimpse into something witnessed long ago, when battles between gods and men involved a kind of technology that to the ancients was indistinguishable from magic. For the people of ancient India, these were not just myths, they were itihasa, sacred history. Thus it happened. The stories were passed down not as allegory, but as a genuine record, a part of a cultural memory that believed its ancestors had lived in the shadow of cosmic wars. The sheer detail and consistency of these tales make them difficult to dismiss. When we place them beside the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, the connection becomes even more unsettling. The excavation of this ancient city of the Indus Valley revealed signs of a sudden and violent end. Skeletons were found lying in the streets, as if they had been struck down in a single, terrifying instant. And even more puzzling were patches of stone that appeared vitrified, fused and melted, as though subjected to an immense flash of heat. While mainstream archaeology attributes the city's fall to more conventional causes, the unsettling parallels remain. A city abandoned abruptly, its people caught in a moment of terror, its remains whispering of a fire that melted stone, and an epic that describes weapons that scorch, blind, and poison. The two converge like two halves of a forgotten story, a story that begs the question, were the ancients only imagining, or were they remembering? What lingers most is the profound sense of cycles. Hindu cosmology teaches of yugas, great ages that rise and fall in a recurring pattern. Each age begins in a state of order and ends in a time of great decline, often with a catastrophic event that clears the way for renewal. The battles of the Mahabharata are said to have taken place at the end of the Dvapara Yuga, just before the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness in which we now live. In this view, destruction is not an anomaly, but an inevitable part of a greater pattern. If the Astras and Vimanas were real, perhaps they were the remnants of technologies from a prior, more advanced age, brought into our own, and then lost again in the catastrophe that followed. Standing on the dry mound of Mohenjo-daro today, among the silent ruins of its streets and granaries, one feels the immense weight of a lost history. The walls whisper of a city that thrived for centuries, sophisticated and organized, only to vanish in an instant. The epic whispers of a war fought with fire brighter than suns, with weapons that poisoned the land. Between them hangs the same uneasy question: did humanity once wield a power far beyond what we believe possible? And if so, was that power a gift from the heavens, or was it the cause of our own undoing? The Mahabharata doesn't offer a simple answer. It ends not with a clean victory, but with widespread ruin, with kingdoms reduced to dust and with survivors forever haunted by what they unleashed. It offers not triumph, but a profound caution. It serves as a reminder that the pursuit of power carries a cost that echoes through the ages. Perhaps that is why the story has endured for so long, because it carries the memory not just of a war, but of a warning. In its verses, the past speaks directly to the present, reminding us that we once held a fire too great to master, and it nearly consumed us all. Among the ancient texts that were intentionally set aside, never to become part of canonical scripture, yet still persisted in whispers and fragments, is the Book of Enoch. This is a work so deeply unsettling that it was suppressed and hidden away for centuries, preserved only in the remote monasteries of Ethiopia before it was rediscovered in modern times. It tells a story that parallels the familiar account of creation in Genesis, but it is far darker, far more vivid. It is a tale of divine beings who descended from the heavens not to offer blessings, but to defy a sacred rule. These beings were known as the Watchers, a specific order of angels sent to quietly observe humanity. Instead, they chose to intervene, crossing a profound boundary that heaven had drawn. They looked upon the daughters of men, finding them beautiful, and made a solemn oath to bind themselves together in rebellion. The text claims they gathered on a desolate peak, a mountain called Hermon, and swore an oath to abandon their celestial duty and mingle with mortals. What followed was not a simple act of union, but a catastrophic transfer of forbidden knowledge. The Watchers gave humanity the tools of power, a kind of knowledge not meant for their hands. The text claims they taught men the complex arts of metallurgy, how to forge powerful weapons from iron and dazzling ornaments from gold. They taught women the secrets of adornment and enchantment. They even revealed the hidden mysteries of the stars, the movements of the moon, and the signs of the heavens. In essence, they armed humanity with a progress that was stolen from the divine realms. The result, the book tells us, was a spreading corruption. From these forbidden unions came the Nephilim, a race of mighty giants whose immense size and violent appetites began to consume the earth itself. The land became stained with blood, and the cries of the oppressed reached the heavens. God, witnessing this terrible corruption, decreed a great judgment. The archangels were sent to bind the Watchers in chains beneath the earth, hurling them into a profound darkness until a final judgment. The Nephilim, their bodies destroyed, were said to leave behind restless spirits, wandering demons that still haunt the earth. And upon humanity came the flood, a terrible cleansing meant to wash away the hybrid offspring and the dangerous knowledge that had tipped the world into ruin. This story feels both mythic and yet strangely specific. The details of metallurgy, astronomy, and sorcery feel like more than just allegories. They resemble the sudden and unexplained leaps in human culture that appear in the archaeological record, moments when societies surged forward as if a crucial piece of knowledge had simply been handed to them. Could the Watchers be a faded memory of such a leap, remembered not as progress but as an act of cosmic transgression? The very idea of divine beings descending to mingle with mortals echoes in so many traditions. The Apkallu sages of Mesopotamia, who brought wisdom, and the tale of Prometheus, who stole fire for humanity. The pattern we've seen before re-emerges. Divine beings cross a boundary, grant forbidden knowledge, and unleash consequences far beyond their control. The Nephilim themselves occupy a shadowy place in the collective human memory. Though briefly mentioned as giants in Genesis, the Book of Enoch expands them into terrifying presences. In folklore across the world, tales of giants persist, builders of megaliths, mountain guardians, and ancestors of vanished tribes. From the Cyclops of Greece to the Jotnar of Norse myth, the motif repeats again and again. Could the Nephilim be part of a global memory of beings larger and stranger than humans, a race now erased by a flood that scrubbed the world clean? The punishment of the Watchers resonates with themes found elsewhere. Like Prometheus, they are bound for stealing fire. Like the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, they are chained beneath the earth, their voices silenced forever. The parallel suggests a shared archetype, a memory that transcends culture, the fall of divine rebels who gave humanity what heaven had forbidden. Their legacy is profoundly ambivalent. On one hand, they brought knowledge, astronomy, metalwork, and enchantment, without which civilizations would not have flourished. On the other hand, they brought violence and chaos, a destruction of balance, and the unleashing of giants who consumed the world. The flood that follows in the Book of Enoch is no mere natural disaster. It is a deliberate act of erasure, a cosmic reset meant to wipe away the profound corruption of the Nephilim and their progeny. In this light, the flood myths of Mesopotamia, the Bible, and countless other cultures take on a new and chilling resonance. They are not simply stories of divine wrath, but memories of a cleansing designed to remove a hybrid race and the dangerous knowledge it carried. Humanity, fragile but untainted, would survive through a chosen remnant, Noah, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, while the giants perished. But the story tells us that even if the Nephilim's bodies were destroyed, their spirits lingered on, restless, vengeful, and corrupting. Thus, even after the flood, the echoes of their presence continued to haunt the world. What is most striking about the Book of Enoch is its perspective. It does not present the Watchers as abstract symbols, but as beings with names, desires, and deeds. It portrays them as tangible figures whose actions had consequences written in blood and fire. It suggests that the boundary between heaven and earth was once porous, that beings from above mingled freely until they were punished. This idea reverberates in later traditions: fallen angels in Christianity, jinn in Islam, spirits cast down from the heavens. Always the story's the same. Beings of power crossed into the human world, brought both knowledge and chaos, and were ultimately exiled. What is most striking about the Book of Enoch is its perspective. It does not present the Watchers as abstract symbols, but as beings with tangible desires and deeds, whose actions had consequences written in blood and fire. It suggests that the boundary between heaven and earth was once porous, that divine beings mingled freely until they were punished. In a way, the Book of Enoch reframes human history. It implies that what we call progress, metallurgy, science, magic, was not our own great achievement, but a gift stolen from a higher realm. It suggests that the great disasters that followed, the flood, the fall of civilizations, were all direct consequences of knowledge gained far too soon. Whether you see this as a myth or a fading memory, the caution is clear. Knowledge without wisdom destroys. Power without restraint corrupts. The giants of old stand as a warning, their silent shadows stretching even into our modern age. The story endures because it touches on a fundamental human fear and fascination with a knowledge that exceeds our grasp. The Watchers fell, the Nephilim perished, and the great flood swept clean the earth. Yet the memory of them remains in scripture, in folklore, and in the strange ruins of megaliths that dot the globe. It is a recurring memory that appears across cultures. Beings from the sky, gifts of forbidden knowledge, a hybrid race, and a catastrophic purge. Perhaps it is only a myth shaped to explain the unknown, but perhaps it is the faint echo of a history in which gods and mortals once mingled too closely, and the price of that mingling was nearly the end of the world. Flood stories appear in cultures all over the world, with remarkably similar details despite vast distances. In Mesopotamian myths, like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis, a god warns a chosen individual to build a large boat to survive a coming deluge. The biblical story of Noah follows this same pattern, as does the Popol Vuh from Mesoamerica, which describes a flood that destroys an earlier flawed version of humanity. These stories share a common rhythm, a period of corruption, a divine warning, rising waters that cleanse the world, and a small remnant that survives to begin again. The flood is often presented as a moral cleansing, but some texts, like the Book of Enoch, offer a more specific reason. It states that the flood wasn't just for humanity's sin, but was a deliberate act to wipe out the Nephilim, a race of giants born from forbidden unions between divine beings and mortals. According to this narrative, the giants' violence and arrogance threatened to consume the world, and annihilation was the only solution. This idea of a targeted cosmic surgery is also reflected in the Mesopotamian texts, where the gods are divided. The god Enlil demands humanity's extermination, while Enki sympathizes and works to save a remnant. This struggle between a punisher god and a protector god is a recurring theme in mythic history. The descriptions of the flood are visceral and hauntingly similar across cultures. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim describes the storm as a powerful force that overwhelmed people like locusts, a scene echoed by the biblical account. The small details, like the release of a bird to find land, are too precise to be mere coincidence. They suggest a shared memory of a real, traumatic event that was so profound it became engraved into the human psyche. The Popol Vuh adds another layer, describing the flood not just as water, but as a strange rain of resin that burned as it fell, dissolving the race of men made of wood. This could be symbolic, but some scholars see a possible connection to volcanic or cosmic events. After the cleansing, a new, more balanced humanity is created from maize, reinforcing the idea that a flawed creation was erased and replaced. These global flood myths, with their common threads of divine warning, a chosen survivor, and a deliberate cleansing, point to something deeper than simple natural disasters. They serve as a powerful reminder of how fragile civilization is and how, in an instant, a world can be remade. Modern geology offers some evidence for the global flood myths. Around 12,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, the planet experienced rapid changes. As massive glaciers melted, sea levels rose dramatically. This led to catastrophic floods in various parts of the world. For example, the Black Sea may have been a freshwater lake that was suddenly inundated by the Mediterranean, drowning vast, fertile valleys. In North America, the Missoula floods carved immense channels and scoured the landscape in a very short time. These natural disasters, while localized, could have been stitched into humanity's collective memory, inspiring the flood myths. However, the story's global consistency, the themes of a divine warning, a chosen survivor, and a deliberate cleansing suggest something more profound than a natural disaster. These details point to a shared trauma that may have been a single event, remembered and retold across continents. The flood is often remembered as more than just a calamity. It's seen as the end of an age, the long mythical reigns of the Sumerian kings before the flood vanish, replaced by shorter, more realistic spans. In the Egyptian myth of Zep-Tepi, a time when gods ruled recedes into a distant past. It's as if the flood was a veil, drowning not only lands but also memories, leaving humanity with a sense of loss it cannot fully articulate. For the survivors, the flood became the great dividing line of time. Before it, myths tell us that gods and giants walked the earth. Afterward, men were left to rule alone. The covenant with Noah, a promise that the world would never again be destroyed by water, speaks to the deep trauma of this event. The rainbow is a sign of stability after chaos. But behind that promise lies a warning. the flood was not a random act of nature, but a deliberate intervention. If such an intervention happened once, could it happen again? From the ruins of Ur to the terraces of the Andes, the enduring flood myths suggest a shared global memory. Entire cultures separated by oceans preserve the same fundamental story. Humanity nearly perished, but a few were saved by divine instruction. Whether this is interpreted as a myth born from shared experiences of localized natural disasters, or as the echo of a single, world-reshaping event, the consistency is undeniable. It's as if the flood is carved into the very bedrock of human identity, a primal reminder that even the mightiest civilizations can vanish in an instant. The Book of Enoch gives the flood another dimension, framing it not just as punishment, but as the purging of a dangerous knowledge. Humanity was never meant to wield. This suggests the myths are also warnings. Progress without wisdom courts destruction. The ancients may not have used terms like radiation or genetic manipulation, but they understood the immense cost of knowledge too great for fragile hands. Their solution was drastic, a flood to wash it all away. The myths tell us that when the floodwaters receded, something fundamental had changed. The world didn't just lose cities and crops, it lost the visible presence of its gods. Before the deluge, these beings walked openly among mortals. They reigned as kings, taught skills, and intermarried with humankind. After the flood, their presence became muted, refracted through priests, idols, visions, and dreams. The transition from an age of intimacy to an age of distance is stark. The era of the gods walking the earth ended, leaving humanity alone to navigate a world where the divine was no longer a tangible, physical presence. It leaves us with a lingering question: where did they go? After the Great Flood, myths from various cultures suggest a fundamental change in the relationship between humanity and the gods, a divine withdrawal. The intimacy of an earlier era ended, replaced by a new age of distance and separation. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki, once physically present and active, retreat to the heavens or the underworld. Though their names are still invoked in hymns, they are no longer seen by mortals. Similarly, in Egypt, the first time Zep-Tepi ends as the divine rulers vanish, leaving the pharaohs to act as their earthly stand-ins. The Sumerian king list makes this break explicit. Before the flood, kings ruled for thousands of years, but afterward, lifespans contract, and kingship becomes a human affair. The Hebrew tradition reflects this change as well. The Nephilim, the mixed nature beings, are gone, and the Watchers are chained in darkness. Humanity is left to its own devices, without the dangerous mediation of these transgressors. A veil of silence seems to descend, marking a new, strict division between the heavens and the earth. Despite this clear departure, the gods never vanish completely. Fragments of memory and whispers of their continued existence remain in various cultures. The Greeks remembered the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, their power latent and waiting. The Maya told of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who departed across the sea with a promise to one day return. The Hopi speak of the Kachinas, star beings who withdrew but continue to watch over humanity. The Egyptians wrote of Osiris ruling in the underworld, and Isis wandering in grief, showing that the gods still existed, albeit in a more remote capacity. The change is not one of complete disappearance, but of presence. Before the flood, the myths are rich with detail about the gods' lives. They're building, warring, mating, and instructing. Afterward, they become more remote, their interventions rarer, and their presence more symbolic than physical. It's as if a door has closed. Some traditions say they returned to their celestial homes, while others claim they went underground into hidden chambers beneath mountains or seas. A few even hint that they still walk among us, veiled and diminished. Each of these possibilities conveys the same profound sense of loss. The golden age of open contact was over, and a more uncertain age had begun. Archaeology appears to echo the shift from a time of divine presence to a time of absence. Monumental sites of prehistory, megaliths, pyramids, and ziggurats show a level of knowledge and ambition that seems to regress in later eras. After the flood myths, societies appear to rebuild on a smaller scale with simpler architecture and less advanced technologies. It's as if a great collapse wiped out not only lives but the skills and knowledge that had previously existed, leaving survivors to begin again with fragments. Some archaeologists point to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a site built around 12,000 years ago, as evidence of this lost era. Its carved pillars and astronomical alignments appear far too advanced for a hunter-gatherer society. What's even more puzzling is that the site was deliberately buried, preserved yet hidden from the world. This raises a question. Was its concealment part of a greater, intentional closing of the age when gods and men mingled openly? The silence of the gods didn't erase their memory. Instead, humanity filled the void with ritual. Priests became intermediaries, claiming to speak for the absent deities, and kings wrapped themselves in divine titles, insisting their blood carried the essence of gods long gone. Temples rose as places where the gods might visit briefly, in visions or through idols, but never again as rulers walking in daylight. This profound absence became the very foundation of religion, transforming faith into a bridge across a distance that had not existed before. Even as the gods vanished, they left behind promises of their return. The banished Apkallu sages in Mesopotamian texts were said to come back in times of great need. The Maya's Quetzalcoatl vowed to return in a time of darkness. The Hopi prophecy of the blue star Kachina speaks of the return of star beings to cleanse and renew the earth. It's as if every culture, in losing its gods, gained a prophecy. This absence, then, is not final but preparatory, a great silence waiting for a new dawn. The myths and ruins of ancient cities speak to a profound duality. On one hand, humanity was liberated by the gods' absence. Their withdrawal forced us to grow, invent, and shape our own destiny. On the other, we were impoverished by it. A golden age of knowledge and wisdom vanished, and we were left to stumble forward, haunted by the shadow of what was lost. So the question remains, where did they go? Were they real beings who retreated to hidden realms, watching from afar? Were they archetypes that receded into the subconscious, leaving only symbols behind? Or were they exiles from another world, returning to the stars until the cycle demands their return? The myths offer no single answer, but they all share one conviction: the gods were once here, and now they're gone. That absence defines us as much as their presence once did. Across the vast Atlantic, far from the deserts of Mesopotamia and Egypt, another land nurtured its own visions of gods who walked among mortals. In the deep valleys and high plateaus of Mesoamerica, civilizations like the Olmec, the Maya, and the Aztec built temples that rose like mountains, their surfaces covered with intricate carvings of serpents, jaguars, and celestial beings. Among these figures, one stands apart, a god who was both gentle and powerful, part human and part divine. His name was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. His image stretched across centuries, adopted and reimagined by different cultures, but always carrying the same profound aura of mystery. He was not a remote deity of storms or war, but a teacher, a giver of knowledge, a civilizer who brought light to his people. Most hauntingly, he was a god who departed with a clear promise that one day he would return. The earliest roots of Quetzalcoatl may lie with the Olmec, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, who left behind colossal stone heads and enigmatic depictions of beings with serpentine features. Later, the Toltec and Aztec empires embraced him as a central figure in their pantheons. His name itself reveals his paradox. Quetzal, the radiant bird with emerald feathers, and Coatl, the serpent that moves silently through the earth and shadows. To Geetha, they form a union of sky and soil, a being who bridges the heavens and the ground. Quetzalcoatl embodied this duality. He was both divine and mortal, celestial and terrestrial, wise and deeply flawed. Legends tell that he descended among mortals not to dominate them, but to guide. He taught them agriculture, gifting them maize, the very staff of life. He introduced the complex arts of weaving, pottery and the calendar, a sacred knowledge that ordered society and connected it to the stars. He stands in stark contrast to the harsher deities of the Aztec pantheon, gods who demanded the blood of human sacrifice to sustain the cosmos. Quetzalcoatl, in his compassion and enlightenment, opposed this ritual, urging instead offerings of flowers and song. Could he have been a memory of a different kind of visitor? One who arrived not to enslave, but to uplift a fledgling civilization? Yet even he was not free from a very human shadow of downfall. Stories say that Quetzalcoatl was tricked by his rival Tezcatlipoca, the god of night and sorcery. Through deception and intoxication, Quetzalcoatl was shamed, and in his profound sorrow, he departed. In some versions of the myth, he immolated himself, his spirit rising as the morning star, Venus. In others, he sailed eastward across the great sea, vowing to one day return in glory. That motif, the departure of a god with a promise of return, resonates powerfully with myths from other lands. Osiris was slain and resurrected. Jesus ascended with the promise to one day come again. Quetzalcoatl, gone but not forever. Each embodies humanity's longing for a divine presence to return, for an age of lost wisdom to dawn again. The very ruins of Teotihuacan, the ancient city whose name means the place where the gods were made, still carry his mark. Here, the magnificent temple of the feathered serpent rises, its walls adorned with rows of serpent heads, their plumes carved as if they were alive in stone. Beneath this temple, archaeologists have found a tunnel lined with mica, a mineral with unusual reflective and insulating properties, and chambers filled with pools of liquid mercury that shimmer like starlight. What purpose could such features serve in a ceremonial centre? Were they symbolic rivers of the underworld, or did they play a role in a lost ritual that was meant to connect Earth with the cosmos? Some speculate they were more than ritual, perhaps remnants of a technology beyond the scope of ancient Mesoamerica. Whatever their true function, they add to the profound aura of Quetzalcoatl as a figure tied not only to myth, but to enigmatic material traces. Centuries later, the Aztecs embraced Quetzalcoatl as both ancestor and god. Their priests recorded that he was a pale-skinned man with a beard, unlike the people of the land. This description, carefully preserved in their oral tradition, startled historians when the Spanish conquistadors arrived. Hernán Cortés, with his ships, his horses, and his steel armour, was at first tragically mistaken by some to be the returning Quetzalcoatl. This devastating misidentification opened the door to conquest, fulfilling a prophecy in the most ruinous way imaginable. Whether it was a mere coincidence or a profound manipulation, the link between the prophecy and history reveals the enduring power of Quetzalcoatl's promise. For the Aztecs, the memory of a god who departed but vowed to return was so potent that it shaped their response to the strangers from across the sea. But who was he, truly? Was Quetzalcoatl merely a cultural symbol of renewal and order? Or was he a memory of someone real, a being who came from elsewhere and walked among mortals? His gifts, agriculture, the calendar, knowledge of the stars, mirror those of other culture bringers from myths worldwide, a testament to a shared, lost history that refuses to be silenced. Across the world, the same powerful archetype appears again and again, the culture bringer. In Mesopotamia, Enki gave the gift of irrigation. In Greece, Prometheus brought humanity fire. In Polynesia, Maui fished islands from the sea. Each of these stories features a figure who defies other gods, brings a vital knowledge to humanity, and then departs, leaving the world forever changed. The consistency of this pattern suggests more than mere coincidence. Quetzalcoatl, like these other figures, may represent not an invention, but a shared memory, a trace of ancient encounters with beings who carried a wisdom from beyond our world. What makes him especially haunting is his humanity. Unlike many gods of war and domination, he was fallible. He erred, he suffered, and he left his people in sorrow. His vulnerability made him relatable, a deity of not just the stars but of struggle. His dual nature, both divine and flawed, embodied the human condition itself, and perhaps this is why his memory has endured so long. Today, the image of the feathered serpent still coils through the ruins of Mesoamerica. Tourists climb the steps of his temples, often unaware that beneath their feet lie chambers filled with mercury and carvings of ancient stars. Scholars continue to debate his origins, while indigenous traditions preserve his memory as a culture hero, a guide who gave more than he ever took. In the morning star, Venus, he still shines, rising and setting, a celestial reminder of his cycle of departure and return. Perhaps Quetzalcoatl was only a myth, a story shaped by humanity's need for order and compassion in a world filled with sacrifice and conquest. Or perhaps he was something more, a visitor, a teacher, a being whose presence was so real that it echoed in stone, and whose departure was so profound that it etched itself into prophecy. Whatever the truth, the powerful promise of his return remains one of the most powerful motifs in human memory. Across cultures, the gods may leave, but they always promise to come back. And in that promise lies hope, fear, and the unending question of whether we are waiting for the gods, or whether the gods are waiting for us to finally remember them. North of Mexico City, rising from the valley floor like a petrified dream, stands Teotihuacan, a place the Aztecs encountered centuries after its builders had vanished. They gave it a name that captured its profound mystery, the city where the gods were made. For in its silent avenues and colossal pyramids, they saw not the work of ordinary men, but of powers far beyond. The city sprawls across 20 square kilometers, its wide avenue of the dead lined with temples and palaces, culminating in the massive pyramid of the sun and the slightly smaller pyramid of the moon. Between them lies the temple of the feathered serpent, its stone walls adorned with rows of serpent heads, plumed and scaled, staring outward as though keeping watch across the centuries. What makes Teotihuacan so haunting is not only its immense scale, but its complete anonymity. No records remain of its rulers, no inscriptions of kings. Unlike the Maya, who filled their monuments with the detailed dynasties of their past, Teotihuacan left only silence. The people who built it are unknown to us, their language lost, their names erased by time. When the Aztecs arrived, the city was already a ghost town, its temples still monumental, but its palaces empty. They believed it must have been constructed by the gods themselves, or by a vanished race guided by a kind of divine knowledge. Modern archaeology dates its flourishing to around 100 BCE, but it cannot answer the deeper questions. Who built it and why? The layout of the city suggests an intention far beyond simple urban planning. The Avenue of the Dead aligns with specific astronomical events, its axis tilted to match the rising of the Pleiades and the movement of the sun at key times of the year. The pyramids of the sun and moon seem to mirror celestial bodies, while the temple of the feathered serpent reflects a deep cosmology that bound the sky, the earth, and the ocean together. The city appears to have been built as a map of the heavens, a terrestrial mirror of the cosmos. Like the pyramids of Egypt, which are aligned with the constellation Orion, Teotihuacan embodies the same profound principle. To create on earth what exists in the sky. Standing on the summit of the Pyramid of the Sun, one can see the precise alignment of the entire city, its avenues stretching outward like rays of a great cosmic diagram. It feels less like a human city and more like a sacred stage for gods, a place where rituals reenacted the very creation of the world. The absence of royal tombs or inscriptions suggests that the focus was not on kings, but on the cosmos itself. The city was dedicated not to the glory of individuals, but to the reenactment of a cosmic order. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent, archaeologists have discovered something even stranger. Tunnels stretch deep beneath the pyramid, leading to chambers lined with reflective mica and filled with shimmering pools of liquid mercury. The discovery startled researchers. Mercury, a toxic and difficult substance to obtain, had no obvious ritual purpose in ancient Mesoamerica. Yet here it was, glistening like rivers of silver in the torchlight. Some have suggested it symbolized the underworld, the sacred rivers that souls must cross in death. Others wonder if it had a more practical function, perhaps connected to energy or light. The mica is equally unusual. Found in precise layers beneath floors and walls, it is a mineral with insulating and reflective properties. Was it symbolic, or was it part of a technology that we no longer understand? These materials, rare and difficult to transport, suggest a purpose far beyond mere decoration. The sheer size of the pyramids deepens the mystery. The Pyramid of the Sun rises over 70 meters high, built from millions of tons of stone and earth. In this silent city, with its lack of history and its abundance of strange materials, the feeling is less of a human city and more of an altar where cosmic renewal took place. The mercury rivers and mica chambers might then represent the underworld, the hidden mechanisms of a kind of cosmic machine designed to maintain the balance of the universe. Some researchers have speculated even further, noting that the combination of mica and mercury resembles components of advanced energy systems. They suggest that the alignments of the pyramids and tunnels might reflect not only cosmology, but a forgotten function. Could Teotihuacan have been more than ceremonial, perhaps a site of advanced experimentation with natural forces? To many, such theories sound like fantasy, yet they echo similar questions asked of the Egyptian pyramids. Why do so many ancient monuments, scattered across continents, share alignments with the stars, use unusual materials, and hint at purposes beyond tombs or temples? Are these coincidences, or are they fragments of a deeper tradition, the memory of a knowledge older than the civilizations that inherited it? The profound silence of Teotihuacan is its loudest feature. No kings, no battles, no names, only temples aligned to the stars and tunnels filled with strange materials. It is as if the builders wanted the city to speak not of themselves, but of the cosmos, to endure as a map of time rather than a record of men. And yet its sudden collapse around the 6th century CE remains unexplained. The city simply emptied, its grandeur left to crumble. By the time the Aztecs arrived, it was already a ruin, a sacred place inhabited only by memory. To walk its avenues today is to step into that memory. The Pyramid of the Sun rises before you, massive and silent, its stone steps leading upward toward the heavens. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent whispers of a god who once walked among men and promised to one day return. Beneath the surface, rivers of mercury still glisten in the dark, unseen by the sun, but carrying their own secrets. The city does not explain itself. It asks questions written in stone, in its silence, and in its flawless alignments with the stars. Perhaps Teotihuacan was nothing more than the pinnacle of human ingenuity, a city built by visionaries who sought to mirror the heavens. Or perhaps it was more, a place where gods and men once conspired, where knowledge was preserved in stone and in tunnels, waiting for the day it would be understood again. Whatever the truth, it remains one of the greatest enigmas of antiquity. A city without rulers, without a written history, but filled with the immense weight of something larger. The Aztecs were not wrong to call it the place where gods were made, for in its silence, its immensity, and its enduring mystery, Teotihuacan still feels like a place where heaven once touched the earth. Stretching across the arid plains of southern Peru lies a canvas so immense that its designs cannot be fully appreciated from the ground. The Nazca lines, etched into the desert floor by carefully removing the dark oxidized stones to reveal the pale earth beneath, form geoglyphs that cover nearly 500 square kilometers. Some of these are simple, straight lines that run for kilometers across the barren land. Others are intricate figures: a monkey with a coiled tail, a spider with impossibly long legs, a hummingbird whose wings stretch for hundreds of feet, and a towering humanoid figure waving from the side of a hill. For centuries, these lines lay hidden in plain sight, too vast to be recognized until pilots in the 20th century flew overhead and saw the images from the sky. Only then did the full scope of this desert mystery reveal itself, an art form meant not for human eyes on the ground, but for a viewer looking down from far above. The Nazca people who created them flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE. They left behind a rich legacy of pottery, textiles, and sophisticated irrigation systems, but they left no texts, no records explaining the purpose of these lines. The extreme dryness of the desert has perfectly preserved them, but their true meaning is a subject of endless debate. Some scholars believe the lines were ritual pathways used in ceremonies to honor water and fertility. Pilgrims may have walked the paths as offerings to the gods of the sky and earth, tracing sacred journeys with their feet. Others see them as giant calendars with alignments marking solstices and equinoxes, linking the movements of the sun and stars to the rhythms of agriculture. But the sheer size of the figures and the fact that they can only be truly appreciated from the air raises questions that reach far beyond ordinary explanations. Why would anyone build images that no one on the ground could ever hope to see? Some suggest they were made specifically for the gods themselves, celestial beings who would look down and recognize the devotion of mortals. From the ground, the designs may have been invisible, but from above, they are unmistakable. A hummingbird stretching across the desert is not for human eyes, it is for watchers in the heavens. In this light, the Nazca lines resemble messages, silent signals carved into the earth to attract the attention of those above. Were they prayers written in a language of geometry and image? Prayers not to an invisible force, but to beings who literally resided in the sky? The incredible precision of some of the lines only deepens the mystery. Straight and unbroken for kilometers, they run across uneven terrain, hills, and valleys without any deviation, as though they were laid down with surveying tools far beyond the technology of the time. Some lines intersect at angles that suggest a specific astronomical intention, aligning with the rising and setting of certain stars. Other lines radiate outward, like the spoked wheels of a giant bicycle, or they resemble long runways, vast strips of cleared desert that seem less like art and more like paths for descent. It is this runway-like appearance that has fueled some of the more provocative speculation. Could the Nazca lines have been landing strips, not for birds or men, but for machines of the sky? The idea, popularized in the 20th century, may sound far-fetched to some, yet the imagery of these endless straight runways carved into the desert rock leaves the question open. It forces us to wonder about the intended purpose of a vast and complex creation that was not meant for human eyes. The Paracas geoglyphs, located near the Nazca lines, are also perplexing. The most famous is the candelabra, a massive three-pronged symbol carved into a hillside. Unlike the Nazca lines, which are visible from the sky, the candelabra is easily seen from the sea, suggesting it served as a beacon for sailors. Its similarity to later Nazca designs points to a long-standing tradition of creating symbols meant to be viewed from an elevated perspective. The Parakas people also practiced cranial elongation, intentionally shaping their skulls into stretched forms. This practice has led some to question if they were imitating beings they believed descended from the skies, the same beings for whom they carved these vast geoglyphs. Archaeologists primarily explain the Nazca lines as having a ceremonial, agricultural, and astronomical purpose. The images, such as the hummingbird and spider, are directly associated with fertility and water, which were critical to the survival of the Nazca people. These symbols formed a visual language, a kind of massive invocation written on the land. However, their sheer scale remains uncanny. Why create figures that could only be fully appreciated from the air when smaller, more visible designs would have sufficed for ground-based rituals? The Nazca people invested enormous effort into creating something they could not see in its entirety. This suggests a profound faith that someone or something above would see them. The lines served as a message, a prayer written in stone for beings in the heavens. This motif is found in other cultures, such as the Egyptian practice of aligning pyramids with stars. The Nazca lines are a testament to this ancient human impulse, to connect the ground with the sky and to leave a message for the watchers above. In 2018, drones discovered dozens of new figures hidden on hillsides, further expanding the mystery. These new geoglyphs suggest that the Nazca Desert is a vast text still being read, with countless images potentially waiting to be found. The Nazca lines are not crude marks but deliberate, elegant designs meant to endure for millennia. They whisper of a people who believed their devotion had to be inscribed into the very skin of the earth. Whether we see them as rituals, astronomical diagrams, or signals to sky beings, they remind us of humanity's ancient longing to be seen from above. They're a silent prayer, asking for rain, blessings, and recognition. To this day, they stretch across the desert, lines that lead nowhere, yet point everywhere, a testament to one of the greatest enigmas of human history. They silently whisper to the skies, "We are here, we remember, we reach upward." In the highlands of Guatemala, the Quiche Maya preserved their creation story, the Popol Vuh, or Book of Counsel. This sacred text is unique in that it describes the gods' repeated attempts to create humanity, suggesting a process of trial and error rather than a single act of divine will. The Popol Vuh begins with the creator gods, heart of sky and heart of earth, emerging from a primordial void of just sky and sea. Their goal was to create beings who could honour and sustain them. First attempt, the Mudmen. The gods shaped figures from the earth, but they were fragile and dissolved in the rain. This creation was a failure, too weak to endure. Second attempt, the Wooden People. From trees, the gods carved beings who could walk and talk. However, these wooden people had no hearts, no souls, and no memory of their creators. The gods punished them by sending a great flood and causing their own tools and animals to turn on them. The remnants of this failed race, the story says, became the monkeys of the forest. Final attempt, the Maize People. The gods finally succeeded by creating humanity from ground maize and water. These new beings were strong, resilient, and capable of reverence. To the Maya, they were the people of maize, sustained by it and made of it. This process of failed creations and divine adjustments suggests that the gods were not omnipotent, but rather like craftsmen, refining their techniques until they achieved success. The Popol Vuh's sequence of trials and errors echoes creation myths from other cultures. Mesopotamian myths describe humans being made from clay and divine blood. The Book of Enoch speaks of divine beings meddling with creation. The flood that destroys the wooden people is a motif found in the biblical story of Noah and the Mesopotamian epics. The Popol Vuh also tells of a key limitation placed on the final successful creation. The first Maize people were too perfect, their vision too sharp, their knowledge rivaling that of the gods. To maintain humility, the gods intentionally clouded their vision, deliberately making humanity imperfect and constrained. This is the same theme found in other myths, such as the story of Prometheus and the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. Humanity reaches too far, and the gods impose limits. Despite being written down in the 16th century, the Popol Vuh preserves traditions that are far older. The myth's imagery of failed prototypes and divine adjustments is too precise to dismiss. The Maya did not know of Sumer or Babylon, yet their myths echo the same fundamental patterns of divine trials and limited human creation. The myth is still alive today. To the Maya, the corn they plant and the tortillas they eat are not just nourishment, they are a direct link to their creation. The story of the Popol Vuh is a declaration that humanity is not a product of chance, but the result of a deliberate, refined, and sometimes costly process. It whispers that we are not inevitable, that we exist because the gods tried, failed, and then tried again, making every meal a reminder of creation itself. Among the most powerful stories preserved in the Popol Vuh is the epic tale of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Ixbalanque. Their journey into the depths of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, is more than an adventure. It is a profound allegory of death, rebirth, and the struggle between mortal resilience and a divine power that seems overwhelming. Where the earlier creation stories of the Popol Vuh describe the failed experiments of humanity, the hero twins embody the triumph of balance, the victory of wit and courage over the forces of darkness. Their saga is not only a myth, but a cosmic drama written across the stars and remembered in sacred rituals for centuries. The story begins with their father and uncle, who were master ball players, a sacred role in Maya culture. Their thunderous game drew the attention of the lords of Xibalba, the sinister death gods who, angered by the noise, summoned them to the underworld. The brothers descended, but they failed the deadly trials set before them. They were sacrificed, their bodies buried, and their father's head was hung in a calabash tree. Yet life persisted, even in death. The story says his skull spit into the hand of a maiden of Xibalba, and she miraculously conceived the hero twins. From this union of a dead skull and a living womb, new champions were born. The tale teaches its first lesson, that life can spring from decay, that endings give birth to new beginnings, and that no defeat is truly final. As the twins grew, they displayed extraordinary gifts, becoming master ball players just like their father. Their talent once again stirred the lords of Xibalba, who summoned them to undergo the deadly trials of the underworld. But unlike their father, the twins were clever, cautious, and cunning. They entered Xibalba not as victims, but as challengers. The underworld they faced was no vague realm of shadows. It was vividly described as a place of houses filled with terrible trials. The House of Darkness, the House of Cold, the House of Jaguars, and the House of Bats. Each chamber was designed to kill or terrify, but the twins, guided by their exceptional wit, survived each ordeal. Where others succumbed, they turned the rules of the game against their opponents, outwitting the death gods at their own contests. In one of the most famous episodes, they willingly allowed themselves to be killed and burned, their ashes cast into a river. Yet from those ashes, they were reborn, first transformed into fish, and then into travelling magicians. Disguised, they returned to Xibalba, performing wonders for the death gods, cutting themselves apart and then reassembling their bodies. At last, the lords begged for the trick to be performed on them. The twins obliged, killing the lords, but refusing to revive them. In this way, the rulers of Xibalba were destroyed, and the hero twins triumphed where their father had failed. The myth is layered with profound meaning. On one level, it is a tale of courage and perseverance, showing that even the most overwhelming powers can be defeated by intelligence and resolve. On another level, It is a cosmic allegory. The ball game was sacred in Maya culture, symbolizing the movement of the sun and moon and the eternal cycles of life and death. The hero twins' ultimate victory is mirrored in the heavens, where they ascend as celestial bodies, one becoming the sun, the other the moon. Their daily cycle in the sky echoes their ancient struggle in Xibalba. Thus the story is written not only in text, but in the very rhythm of day and night. The saga also carries echoes of myths from across the world. Like Osiris in Egypt, whose death and rebirth ensured the cycle of fertility, the twins embody renewal through sacrifice. Like Persephone in Greece, who descends into Hades and returns to bring spring, their journey explains the rhythm of seasons and the promise of life's return. And like Christ in Christian tradition, who descends into death and rises again, they embody a triumph over mortality itself. Across cultures, the theme repeats: descent, trial, death, resurrection, and victory. The hero twins are a part of that global archetype, a story both uniquely Maya and universally human. What is most striking is the way their victory redefines humanity's place in the cosmos. Earlier myths showed humans as fragile, failed experiments of clay and wood, utterly dependent on divine favour. But in the hero twins, humanity achieves a new dignity. They defeat the lords of death not through brute strength, but through cunning, resilience, and courage. They succeed where gods and ancestors failed. In their triumph, mortals prove themselves worthy of a permanent place in the cosmic order. This may explain why the story endured for centuries and why ball courts became sacred spaces across Mesoamerica. Every time the ball bounced between the stone walls of the court, the players were reenacting the battle of the twins against death, keeping alive the profound memory that death can be outwitted and that life always renews itself. Archaeology confirms the sacred role of the ball game. Ball courts are found in nearly every major Mesoamerican city, and reliefs show players in elaborate gear, sometimes in scenes of sacrifice. The game was dangerous and often fatal, but its stakes were far more than entertainment. It was a theatre of myth, a way of bringing cosmic truths into human life. The story assures us that death is not final, that every descent is followed by a return, and see, that every darkness is followed by light. Perhaps the hero twins never lived, but their saga carries a cosmic truth, the human dream of overcoming mortality and ensuring that even in the face of death, life rises again. In the mesas of the American Southwest, where the desert stretches in ochre waves and the sky opens in an endless dome, the Hopi people have carried their traditions through centuries of drought, conquest, and change. Their villages cling to the cliffs of Arizona, standing as the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in all of North America. Yet beneath the quiet endurance of their daily life lies a body of prophecy and myth that speaks of cosmic cycles, visitors from the stars, and the fragile balance between humanity and the universe. To the Hopi, history is not a straight line, but a series of worlds, each rising, flourishing, collapsing, and giving way to the next. And at the heart of their vision are the Kachinas, spirit beings who come from the stars, and the prophecy of the blue star Kachina, a sign that the current world will soon end. The Hopi tell of earlier worlds that were destroyed by fire, by ice, and by flood. Each time, a remnant survived, guided by spiritual beings into caves or across waters, emerging to begin again. We now live, they say, in the fourth world, but the fifth is approaching. The transition is never gentle. Each ending comes with a catastrophe, a great cleansing of corruption, and a renewal through destruction. In this, the Hopi echo the Hindu yugas, the Aztec suns, and the biblical floods. Across cultures, the theme repeats. Humanity rises and falls in great cycles. Central to the Hopi tradition are the Kachinas, a vast pantheon of spirits who serve as intermediaries between humans and the higher realms. In sacred ceremonies, dancers don masks and costumes to embody them, bringing blessings of rain, fertility, and guidance to the people. Yet the Kachinas are not imagined as mere symbols. They are described as real beings who came from the stars, luminous and powerful, who once lived among the Hopi and promised to return. Some elders speak of them descending in flying shields, crafts that shone with a great light, carrying beings who taught the people how to plant, how to live in harmony with the land, and how to prepare for the great cycles of change. The line between spirit and extraterrestrial blurs here. Whether Kachinas gods, ancestors, or Visi, Tors, to the Hopi, the categories do not matter. They were simply guides, beings of the sky who shaped human destiny. Among the many prophecies about the Kachinas, one stands apart: the coming of the blue star Kachina. According to oral tradition, when this spirit removes its mask and dances in the plaza, it signals the beginning of the great purification. The appearance of a blue star in the heavens will mark the end of the fourth world and the dawn of the fifth. The prophecy speaks of a great upheaval, the earth shaking, the seas rising, fire sweeping the land. Only those who live in balance and who keep the old ways will survive to see the renewal. For the Hopi, this is not a distant metaphor, but a living warning carried in ceremonies and retold in whispers from generation to generation. The blue star Kachina embodies the recurring motif of return, the idea that the beings who once guided humanity will come again, not in peace but in judgment, to cleanse and renew the world. The Hopi cosmology also speaks of the ant people, mysterious beings who sheltered humanity during past cataclysms. When fire rained from the sky and the earth burned, the ant people took survivors into their underground homes, fed them with seeds, and protected them until it was safe to emerge. The imagery is evocative: insect-like beings, subterranean shelters, survival through cosmic disaster. To modern ears, it recalls stories of underground bunkers, of alien beings, and of hidden refugees. Yet for the Hopi, it is part of a living memory, a reminder that survival has always depended on guidance from others, whether they are gods, spirits, or star visitors. What makes the Hopi traditions so striking is their emphasis on human choice. The cycles of destruction and renewal are inevitable, but survival depends entirely on living rightly, in harmony with the earth and with each other. The prophecy of the blue star Kachina is not simply a doomsday scenario, but a test. When the star appears, when the world trembles, those who have forgotten balance will perish, while those who honor the old ways will endure. It is both a warning and a source of hope, a prophecy of both destruction and renewal. The similarities with other cultures are uncanny. The Hopi cycles of worlds resemble the Hindu yugas and the Aztec suns. Their blue star prophecy echoes Quetzalcoatl's promise to return, or the Christian vision of the second coming. Their ant people resemble the Mesopotamian Apkallu sages who guided humanity, or the beings of Enoch who descended to instruct. Across the globe, the same patterns emerge: guidance from above, a great catastrophe, survival, and renewal. To stand on the mesas at dusk, watching the sun set over the desert, is to feel the immense weight of these stories. The land itself seems timeless, a place where cycles can unfold without end. The Hopi villages, with their stone houses and kivas, endure as they have for centuries, their ceremonies continuing despite the modern world pressing in. The dancers don their Kachina masks, the drums beat, and the songs rise into the night. For the Hopi, these are not mere performances but acts of renewal, ways of keeping balance and of preparing for what is to come. Every dance is both a memory and a prophecy, linking the present to the ages before and the ages ahead. Perhaps the blue star Kachina will never appear. Perhaps it is only a symbol, a powerful warning to live in harmony. Or perhaps one night, a new light will blaze in the heavens, unmistakable, and the Hopi will know that the time has come. Whether myth or memory, their prophecy carries the same profound truth. The world is fragile, cycles turn, and survival depends not on power, but on balance. In their vision, humanity is not the master of history, but a participant in a dance far older and larger, guided by beings from the stars who remind us that endings are always beginnings. In the dry cliffs of Mali, where sandstone plateaus rise above the Sahel, the Dogon people have lived for centuries in villages carved into the rock. Their culture is rich in masks, dances, and a cosmology that ties the earth to the sky in a way that astounds modern scholars. Among their traditions lies one of the most puzzling enigmas in all of ethnography: detailed knowledge of the star Sirius. Knowledge they should not have possessed without telescopes. The Dogon speak of Sirius not as a single star, but as a system with invisible companions, and they trace their own origins to beings who came from there. Their myth recounts that Amma, the supreme creator, formed the world from a cosmic egg. From this egg came twin beings, the Nommo, often described as part human, part fish or amphibious spirits, connected to water and life. The Nommo are said to have descended from the heavens in a vessel that spun and flashed as it came, raising a great whirlwind of dust. To some, this description sounds uncannily like the landing of a craft, a memory preserved through the language of myth. What makes the Dogon myth so remarkable is its astronomy. According to anthropologists who studied them in the 1930s, the Dogon already knew that Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, had an invisible companion. They called it Po Tolo, the small star, describing it as incredibly heavy and dense, and moving in a 50-year elliptical orbit around Sirius A. This is striking because Sirius B, a white dwarf star with exactly these properties, was not observed by Western astronomers until the mid-19th century, and its density was not truly understood until much later. The Dogon also spoke of a third star in the system, Emma Ya, with its own orbit. While astronomers still debate its existence, the detail is uncanny. How could a pre-industrial people without telescopes possess such knowledge? Some scholars argue that the Dogon may have learned this information from contact with Europeans, perhaps missionaries or travellers. Others note inconsistencies in the ethnographic record, suggesting misinterpretation by early researchers. Yet the Dogon place Sirius at the centre of their rituals and cosmology long before modern astronomy could have influenced them. Their masked dances reenact the cosmic movements of stars, and their ceremonies, like the Sigwai ceremony held every 60 years, align with the 50-year orbital period of Potolo. Whether the knowledge was ancient or borrowed, it is so deeply woven into their identity that it is impossible to separate the people from the star. The Nommo themselves carry a profound archetypal resonance. Described as amphibious, they recall Oannes, the fishman of Mesopotamian legend, who rose from the sea to teach humanity writing and law. They echo the Apkallu, sages who were part fish and part man, and guided kings. They resemble the god Enki of Sumer, the god of water and wisdom who shaped humanity from clay and blood. Even in the Americas, Viracocha of the Andes was said to emerge from Lake Titicaca, bringing civilization. Across the world, the motif recurs. Culture bringers emerging from the water, luminous beings who blend human and aquatic traits, teachers of agriculture, astronomy, and order. The Dogon Nommo are a part of this global chorus, yet their connection to Sirius adds a unique cosmic dimension. They were not only beings of earth or the sea, but messengers from the stars. Their story, like others, is one of fragmentation and return. The myth says that one of the primordial twins rebelled and the world fell into disorder. To restore balance, the other Nommo sacrificed itself, was dismembered, and descended again to bring harmony. This theme of rebellion, sacrifice and restoration echoes myths elsewhere. The Watchers in Enoch who defied heaven, Osiris who was dismembered and restored, and Quetzalcoatl who departed with a promise to return. The Nommo embody the same archetype, beings whose descent brings both disruption and salvation. What is most compelling is the way the Dogon link their identity to the stars. For them, the cosmos is not an abstract concept, but an immediate reality. The cycles of Sirius are tied to their agriculture, their rituals, and their festivals. The masks worn in their ceremonies stretch tall and narrow, as if reaching toward the heavens, embodying the sacred connection between sky and earth. In this way, the Dogon encode cosmic knowledge, not in books or telescopes, but in ritual and dance. Modern astronomy confirms part of their lore. Sirius B does exist. It is incredibly dense, and it orbits Sirius A in roughly 50 years. Whether the Dogon learned this through ancient contact, intuitive tradition, or later transmission remains a subject of heated debate. But even if it can be explained by cultural diffusion, the resonance remains. Why is it always Sirius? In Egypt, its helical rising marked the flooding of the Nile and the beginning of the year. For the Dogon, it is the home of their ancestors, the Nommo. The same star, bright in every night sky, carries different yet interconnected myths, always tied to life, cycles and renewal. The Dogon themselves answer the central question simply, the Nommo told us. To modern ears that may sound implausible, yet in their stories, as in so many others, lies the possibility that history has forgotten more than it remembers, that the stars have always been closer than we think, and that the line between myth and memory is thinner than we dare admit. Across the myths of nearly every culture lingers the shadow of beings larger than life, immense in stature, strength, and sometimes in wisdom. They are remembered as builders of megaliths, as adversaries of gods, or as ancestors of vanished tribes. Their names differ: Nephilim, Titans, Jotnar, Anakim, but the motif repeats with uncanny persistence. Giants once walked the earth. Whether as symbols of chaos, as rulers of an earlier age, or as literal beings, the memory of giants forms a hidden thread, weaving through the story of humanity. In the Hebrew tradition, these giants appear as the Nephilim, born from the union of the Watchers and the daughters of men. Genesis calls them mighty men of renown, yet condemns them as corrupt. Their violence and arrogance became one of the primary reasons for the Great Flood, which swept them away. Yet traces of them persist in later texts. The Anakim, the Rephaim, and the formidable Goliath whom David faced, these figures are not allegories in the biblical narrative. They are described as literal beings, taller, stronger, and feared by entire nations. The Israelites spying the land of Canaan reported that its inhabitants were giants, before whom they felt like grasshoppers. Whether exaggeration or a literal memory, the texts present giants as a reality that shaped the fears and the very wars of ancient peoples. In Greek mythology, the memory of giants takes a more mythic form in the Titans, the primal beings who ruled before Zeus and the Olympians. The Titanomachy describes their war, a clash so immense it shook the very cosmos. Defeated, they were cast into Tartarus, a realm deep beneath the earth. Yet they were not erased. Their legacy continued through the Gigantomachy, battles against their monstrous descendants, and through figures like Atlas, who was condemned to hold up the sky. Here giants symbolize primordial forces, older than the gods of Olympus, reminders that order is always threatened by chaos lurking beneath the surface. Their portrayal, as immense, powerful beings, resonates with the same archetype. A world once ruled by giants, supplanted but never forgotten. The Norse myths preserve giants in abundance. The Jotnar, often mistranslated simply as giants but more accurately described as devourers or elemental beings, are not merely large. They are the living embodiment of natural forces: frost, fire, mountain and sea. The gods themselves, the Aesir, are deeply intertwined with them through ancestry and marriage. Odin, the All-Father, is himself descended from giants. Thor's greatest battles are with them, his hammer smashing their monstrous forms. At Ragnarök, the end of the world, the Jotnar will march again, led by fire and frost to overwhelm the gods. In this tradition, giants are not just simple foes, but also kin, ancestors, and ultimate adversaries, part of the cosmic cycle of destruction and renewal. They represent the untamed forces of nature that will one day reclaim the world from the gods and from humanity. Even in the Americas, the motif echoes. The Paiute people of Nevada tell of the Sea-Taikar, a race of red-haired giants who were the ancient enemies of their ancestors. According to legend, after long and bitter wars, the Paiute trapped the last of them in a cave and set it ablaze. Later, archaeologists discovered Lovelock Cave, where reports of unusually large skeletal remains and giant sandals circulated, though many of these finds were either dismissed or lost to time. In South America, the chronicles of early Spanish explorers tell of encountering natives of extraordinary height in Patagonia, giving rise to the enduring legend of the Patagonian giants. Whether these were exaggerated accounts of tall tribes or echoes of something stranger, the memory persisted. In Polynesia, traditions speak of the Menhune, small in stature, but also of larger-than-life builders who raised immense stone platforms and walls. In Ireland, giants are credited with the construction of the Giant's Causeway, a natural wonder whose hexagonal stones are said to be the remains of a bridge built by the giant Fionn mac Cumhaill. In Basque legend, the Gentilach were giant shepherds who built stone dolmens before retreating into the mountains with the arrival of Christianity. Across the globe, megalithic architecture is attributed to these immense beings. The Cyclopean walls of Greece, the dolmens of Europe, the standing stones of Britain. When later generations encountered monuments they could not explain, they declared, giants must have built them. Why do so many cultures, separated by oceans, preserve this memory? Some scholars interpret them as powerful archetypes, symbols of chaos, of untamed nature, or of the primordial past. Others suggest they reflect encounters with unusually tall tribes whose stories were exaggerated into myth. Yet the persistence and detail of these accounts raise deeper questions. Could the myths preserve a memory of an earlier humanity, a branch of our species, larger and stronger, now extinct? Fossil records do show that hominids varied greatly in size, from the diminutive Homo floresiensis to the robust Neanderthals. Might legends of giants recall encounters with such beings, a memory magnified over generations? Or are they, as some suggest, the remnants of stories about hybrid offspring, like the Nephilim? The archaeology of giants remains controversial. Reports of oversized skeletons unearthed in North America circulated in the 19th century, though many were later dismissed or quietly hidden. Skeptics argue this was due to exaggeration and mismeasurement, while believers insist the evidence was suppressed because it did not fit the official historical narrative. In South America, the discovery of elongated skulls from paratas and massive bones in caves adds further fuel to this speculation. Whether hoaxes, misinterpretations, or true anomalies, these findings seem to mirror the myths themselves. Bones of beings too large to be ordinary men. Even if no colossal beings ever roamed the earth, their shadow in myth serves a purpose. Giants are the embodiment of humanity's boundaries, reminders of what lies beyond our reach. They stand for powers far too immense for mortal hands to tame. Storms that devour coastlines, mountains that defy time, floods that erase kingdoms, and time itself, ever-consuming. To strike down a giant is to impose order upon chaos, to bend wildness to will. David fells Goliath. Zeus casts down the Titans, Thor crushes the Jotnar. Every triumph marks a step upward, the victory of structure over primal force. Yet the giants never truly fade. They haunt the edges of memory, a warning of return. Their echo whispers that beneath the fragile skin of civilization lies an older, fiercer world, one that slumbers but could awaken in an instant. Travelling east to Lebanon, the enigma deepens. At Baalbek, in the Bekaa Valley, the ruins of a Roman temple complex stand atop a foundation far older and more mysterious. A platform of colossal stones, including the Troilithon, 3 blocks weighing around 800 tons each, are fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot pass between them. Nearby lies the stone of the pregnant woman, estimated at over 1,000 tons, one of the largest stones ever quarried by humanity. Modern cranes would struggle to lift it, yet somehow it was cut, shaped and prepared in antiquity. Roman builders used this site for their grand temple of Jupiter, but the foundation predates them by an unknown stretch of time. Who placed those stones and why? Mainstream archaeology suggests they were part of a gigantic platform, but the question of how they were moved remains unanswered. Legends whisper that giants built Baalbek, or that its vast stones were a landing pad, anchoring celestial visitors to the earth. Whatever the truth, Baalbek stands as a riddle carved in stone, a silent challenge to our assumptions about the limits of ancient technology. An even deeper mystery lies in southeastern Turkey, at a site called Göbekli Tepe, which was buried for thousands of years before its discovery in the 1990s. Dating to around 9600 BCE, it is more than twice as old as Stonehenge and the pyramids. Here, enormous T-shaped pillars rise in circles, some engraved with animals, lions, scorpions, vultures, symbols etched into the very dawn of history. The pillars weigh up to 20 tons, yet they were quarried, moved and erected by hunter-gatherers, long before the invention of writing, metal tools, or even agriculture as we know it. Göbekli Tepe completely rewrote our history, proving that monumental architecture and complex society may have arisen not from farming, but from shared ritual and vision. But what vision compelled nomadic peoples to gather and build circles aligned with the stars? Some scholars see it as the world's first temple, a place where myth was enacted in stone. Others wonder if it preserves the memory of an even older tradition, a knowledge carried from a civilization now lost to time. The alignments of these megaliths suggest a purpose beyond simple ceremony. At Stonehenge, the solstice sun is captured with impossible precision. At Göbekli Tepe, carvings appear to encode constellations, perhaps marking events in the sky. At Baalbek, the platform faces the heavens with a monumental scale, as if designed not for men, but for beings who moved through the cosmos. Across the globe, these enigmatic sites are tied to the stars, as if their builders sought not only to honour the heavens, but to connect with them. Why this obsession with the sky? Did they believe their gods dwelled among the stars, watching, guiding, and demanding monuments as messages or anchors? Or did they build them as maps, or perhaps even machines, devices to bridge the earth and cosmos? In the face of such questions, the motif of giants returns. In folklore, megaliths are often attributed to these colossal beings. The stones of Stonehenge were said to have been placed by Merlin with the help of giants. The Cyclopean walls of Mycenae were believed to have been built by one-eyed giants. In Lebanon, locals called Baalbek the fortress of the giants. To later generations, the idea that ordinary humans could have built such structures seemed absurd. Instead, they reached for a more ancient memory. Giants must have done it, perhaps. As these are only myths, or perhaps they preserve a dim recollection of beings larger, stronger, or more advanced, whose works we inherited but could not replicate. The global nature of these monuments is what's truly striking. From Easter Island's Moai to the dolmens of Korea, from Karnak in France to Nan Madol in Micronesia, the world is filled with huge stones arranged with great care, making people wonder why they were built that way. These stone structures are far apart, but they share some common features. They point in the direction of the stars, are built on a massive scale, and show a level of precision that seems unnecessary. It feels like early humans followed a single tradition across the world, using stone to connect with the sky and leave messages that would last for thousands of years. Was this a shared feeling, a deep respect for the sky, or was it knowledge passed down from a forgotten time, an ancient civilization that disappeared in a major disaster but still lives on in the stones? Standing near these massive stones, people feel both awe and a sense of smallness. These stones remind us that our ancestors weren't just simple people, they were clever and capable of doing things we can't explain. They seem to say that history goes much deeper than we know, and that the line between myth and real memory is not clear. Whether these stones were temples, calendars, or memorials for the dead, or something even more mysterious, like machines meant to control energy, send messages to the sky, or keep memories safe through disasters, they definitely lasted. Even after empires disappeared and languages were lost, these stones remain, big and silent, telling their story in stone. From Mesopotamia's Apkallu to Egypt's Zep Tepi, from India's Vimanas to the Maya hero twins, from the Hopi star people to the Dogon's Nomo, a pattern repeats. People everywhere remember teachers, giants, gods, and big disasters. These stories show up in myths across the world, in huge stones that are too heavy to forget, and in stone structures that point to the sky. Again and again, stories talk about times before our own, times destroyed by floods, fires, rebellions, or cycles too big for regular history. As we look at these stories, one question remains. Are we really the first great civilization on Earth, or just the latest in a cycle of rise and fall? The signs are hard to ignore. Myths that look similar in different parts of the world, ruins that don't fit with the usual explanations, traditions of beings from the sky who gave knowledge and then left. The great flood stories are nearly everywhere, telling of a reset that wiped out everything except small parts of what was before. The Book of Enoch describes the flood as a way to clean up forbidden relationships and dangerous knowledge. The Popol Vuh shows creation as a series of failed attempts. The Hopi prophecy says we're in the fourth world, waiting for the fifth. Hindu stories divide time into long ages, called yugas, that end in darkness and then start again. These are not isolated stories. They are part of a bigger picture, pieces of a memory that humanity can't fully forget. Yet modern history tells us we are the first. Archaeology shows civilization started around 3000 BCE, with places like Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Shang dynasty. But what about Göbekli Tepe, built 12,000 years ago, and aligned with stars, with pillars carved with animals and symbols? What about the Sphinx, whose weathering might suggest it was shaped by rains that happened long before its time? What about ruins found beneath the sea near the coasts of India and Japan, where cities lie hidden under the ocean, swallowed when the ice melted? Each of these oddities suggests that the story of civilization may go back much further than we think, and that our timeline might be only a small part of a much older cycle. If humanity has lived before, what happened to those earlier worlds? Maybe they were destroyed by their own pride, as the myths warn. The Watchers gave dangerous knowledge, and it ruined their children. The Mahabharata talks about weapons that burnt cities and poisoned the land. Flood stories tell of arrogance and bad behaviour that led to divine punishment. Perhaps our ancestors reached great power that we can't imagine, then collapsed, leaving behind scattered ruins and a memory passed through myths. Or maybe they were destroyed by forces beyond their control. Comets, earthquakes, sudden changes in the climate. The Younger Dryas period, about 12,000 years ago, brought sudden cooling and flooding, events that could have wiped out civilizations on coasts that are now under the sea. To survivors, These tragic events would have seemed like the wrath of gods as floods and fire. But if this is true, if there were civilizations before, why is there so little evidence? Stone endures, but metals rust. Stone endures, but metals rust. Wood decays and cities crumble. After only a few thousand years, forests reclaim concrete and deserts swallow monuments. The sea relentlessly erodes coastlines. Our own world, if destroyed, would vanish swiftly, leaving only scattered traces. Skyscrapers would collapse into dust. Plastic might decay in centuries. Satellites would fall from the sky. 10,000 years from now, perhaps only a few scattered ruins would remain, and future peoples might wonder if we ever existed at all. If this is true for us, how much more so for those who came before? Perhaps Göbekli Tepe and Baalbek, Stonehenge, and the Nazca lines are exactly such traces, fragments that survived the great cleansing of time. The myths tell us something else, that the gods, the watchers, the star people promise to return. The Hopi await the blue star Kachina. Christians look for the second coming. Whether literal or symbolic, these prophecies keep alive the memory that cycles do not end with destruction. They begin again. Humanity rises, falls, and rises again. Perhaps we are not the first, and perhaps we will not be the last. What then does this mean for us? If we are one more civilization in a cycle, then our achievements, our skyscrapers, our machines, our knowledge of the stars are both miraculous and profoundly fragile. We may believe ourselves to be unique, the pinnacle of progress, but the myths warn against such arrogance. They remind us that others may have come before, reached unimaginable heights, and fallen. They remind us that a single catastrophe can sweep away all certainty in an instant, and they remind us that survival depends not only on power, but on balance. A balance with the earth, with the sky, and with the forces we cannot control. Perhaps the myths are only stories, echoes of fears and dreams. Perhaps the megaliths are only monuments of determined humans. Perhaps there were no giants, no gods, no forgotten civilizations. Yet even if so, the questions remain. Why do we tell the same stories across continents? Why do ruins from distant lands align with the same stars? Why does every culture remember floods, teachers from the sky, and cycles of destruction? There is a resonance here that refuses to die, a memory older than writing, older than history, a whisper that says, remember. Standing today in the shadow of the pyramids, on the plains of Nazca, or before the carved pillars of Göbekli Tepe, we are confronted with silence. The stones do not explain themselves. They simply invite us to wonder. Were we the first, or are we only the latest in a long chain of civilizations, each rising from the ashes of the one before? Will ours endure, or will it too be swept away, remembered only in myth? The answer may never come. Or perhaps it already has, hidden in stories we dismiss as legend, in ruins we cannot explain, and in stars that our ancestors insisted were home. For now, the mystery remains. Humanity walks on the surface of a history deeper than we know, our feet on soil that has seen worlds rise and vanish. The myths are not proof, but they are invitations to look again, to listen, to imagine that the past may be stranger, vaster, and more fragile than we ever believed. And so, as we close this journey through gods, giants, floods, and forgotten stones, we end not with certainty, but with a question. Are we the first or only the most recent chapter in an ancient cycle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe in a lost history of ancient gods that once ruled the earth? Or are the myths simply allegories? Your theories are what make this community so special. If these stories and mysteries have sparked your curiosity, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. The myths insist with quiet persistence that history is never as simple as we think. Until we meet again, sweet dreams, fellow guardians of human wisdom.